Before starting the fanfic, I ask you to please subscribe and leave your like, so we can make this channel great together. Now start and enjoy. Dozens upon dozens of chains broke out from underneath his feet and staked all across his body, each one at a non-fatal point. She wasn't here to kill him. She was here just for him. The rest had only been victims. And like a clean pane of glass, everything made sense to him. He hadn't walked into a village where enemy shinobi were looking for anyone to kill. No, he had walked into something much, much worse. For Naruto Uchiha had willingly walked into a trap laid there just for him. He wasn't the predator here, he was the prey. And just like the predator he had surmised her to be, she came out from behind him, her slender, frail-looking arms snaking around his staked torso. "You're not the only one who knows clones." His whisper made her look at him confused, as was shown by the cute flick of her head to the side. But her eyes widened when the boy pierced in her chains disappeared in a cloud of smoke. "A shadow clone. You really are too much, Naruto-kun. No wonder he wants you so much. Run, but you won't escape me." Her whisper accompanied with a bloodthirsty smile, looking so much more deadly on her innocent young 17-year-old face while she willed her chain back into her body for the time being. "I will have you, love. For me, and only me, has the right to completely destroy you. Let's play if you wanna, hee." Her melodic giggles filled up the clearing as she made her way out with a slight sway of her hips. She couldn't wait to feel the fun when she broke free the chains that were holding him back so much. He really had so much potential, just like he had told her. Meanwhile, a mile away from the village, it's only 4 hours to dawn. Due told no one in particular. Eyeing the moon for its position to gauge the time, he had nothing else to do. If Tsukumo had heard him while he was lying down on the branch above the tree Due sat under, the silver-haired genin showed no signs of acknowledgement. He himself wasn't in the right state of mind right now. That idiot, that go-forsaken, thrice-damned, idealistic and prideful friend of his was off in the village that reeked of blood and death while he was here, lying down doing nothing. His heart screamed at him to go in, all guns blazing, and get that blonde idiot out, knocked unconscious preferably. But his mind, his training and years upon years of his father's teachings still stood tall. He was doing the right thing. Why risk everything for something they didn't even need to do in the first place? But why hadn't he returned by now? It had been a long time now, 2 hours in fact, since Naruto had walked into that hellish village. "You know, Tsukumo?" His inner turmoil was broken off while he gazed down at Due, who was sitting there pretending to read a scroll, pretending because it was a sealing scroll that carried their supplies, but had just broken the long bouts of silence between them yet again. "I feel like a coward." That struck a chord in the listener's heart. Sitting up, Tsukumo was now paying rapt attention to Due and what he had to say. Rarely, if ever, was the ever-youthful boy this serious. But today, the situations really were dire and complicated to say the least. So he wasn't surprised. "Not much. We are not cowards, Due. We are doing the right thing." Tsukumo's voice was harsh, and it wasn't aimed at Due. It came out that way because he himself felt the same damn way, as much as he was loath to admit it out loud. "We are shinobi." He consoled himself more than he did for Due, who had once more gone silent, lacking any signs of his usual enthusiastic fervor right now. Looking at Dewey's slumped form, Tsukumo felt even more angrier at Naruto. Why couldn't he just listen to him and be sensible? For once maybe? Was that really too much to ask? He absolutely hated that part of his usually calm and lazy friend, especially when he'd get all idealistic and become as stubborn as a rock, not caring who was in front of him, and would go in all guns blazing, as if he was possessed by another reckless soul of sorts. But it was who he was. There was no denying that. He'd be more worried if he didn't do things like that. "Due, listen to me." The bushy boy looked up upon hearing the call and saw Tsukumo's consoling smile. "He needs to learn restraints. We can't always bail him." Tsukumo's neck snapped straight in the direction of the village while the words died down in his throat. Jumping down by Dewey's side, who was on guard, seeing this sudden change of demeanor in Tsukumo, Due felt quite confused in the situation. Tsukumo gulped audibly, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple and stopping at the tip of his chin to show just how intimidated he truly felt. That sudden upsurge of chakra he was sensing, it was unlike anything he had ever felt before. How could a human even possess so much chakra? Both Genin's eyes widened in horror seeing the village they hadn't dared to enter light up to life in a bright yellow glow. Tsukumo's mind was analyzing things at a mile a minute. To power up a technique of that scale, most probably a small battalion of shinobi would be required. 5 teams, high Chunin level at the very least, and that in itself spelled trouble for Naruto. Oi, Tsukumo looked on at Due shaking his arm to snap him out of his stupor, while he was fastening his orange leg warmers up tight. Due, what do you think you're dash? I'm going in. Just like that, Dewey's orange scarf was clenched in Tsukumo's hand while he glared down at him murderously. What the hell was wrong with them? Did everyone he know loved to turn suicidal as soon as they saw a challenge that they knew they couldn't survive? What the hell were they trying to prove? But he was shocked when Due pushed his arm back and made some distance with a newfound cold look in his eyes. The taijutsu user had finally had enough. He would do it for me. Just like that, all the accumulated anger drained from Tsukumo's body. Those words from Due hit him harder than any enemy could have done right now. He just watched Due run into the village as fast as he possibly could, without giving away his presence while he stood there dazed out of his wits, and hitting a complete blank at the moment. Naruto really would do it for Due, no, not just for Due, for Tsunade, for their sensei, for any Leaf Shinobi. He'd lay down his life without a thought if he knew there was even a sliver of a chance that he could help them. He had proved it a few hours ago. He'd even do it for complete strangers, allies or not. Naruto would do it for him. Without another thought, he took off right before Due. His father and family's training and ideologies be damned. His friend needed him, and he needed him now. All senses of logic and fear lay forgotten, while only one thought chanted in his mind like a stuck record, over and over and over again. Hold on until I get there. Don't you die on me, you reckless fool. Meanwhile, back in the Hayakawa village streets, in an unknown alley, a golden blur ran through the streets, agility and thoughts like that of a frightened rabbit. Naruto ran as if his life depended on it. He had picked up his pace when the clone he had substituted with. He had substituted as soon as the girl had fallen down on her knees and told him she was there for him had, in fact, been the right choice on his part. If she was here for him, then he was in a trap, and the only thing for him to do in this situation was run and escape this village. He had, after all, gotten all the information he needed from her. She was an Uzumaki, no doubt about that. If her chains weren't a dead giveaway, her massive, almost inhumane chakra reserves she had used to spear his clone with a couple dozen chains even after their exhausting bout certainly had sealed the deal for him. That was no ordinary Uzumaki girl either. Since, as far as he knew, all Senjus and Uzumakis were, in fact, blessed with such stamina, reserves, and healing abilities. The Uzumakis taking the advantage in quantity of their chakra, while the cousin Senjus had the potency of chakra more so than them in a few rare cases, but both had a healing factor that was completely a random phenomenon as to who had how strong of a resilience. Even the density of chakra varied with person to person. But this girl's reserves already surpassed his grandmother's by a fair margin, and even then he knew she was, in fact, only just getting started. So there was only one thing left for him to do: get the information and run. And run he did. Just as he passed another corn to get out of this village as soon as he could before she caught on to his escape plan. But his eyes snapped down at his feet when his Sharingan picked up on a small interference on the ground. A change that made him halt his movement for a minute to analyze it further. Narrowing his eyes on them, he focused on that strange thing before they widened to the point of turning a bit comical just as soon as realization struck him. Shit! The curse slipped past his lips when he finally realized what that black marking that had appeared on the ground truly was. Kanji. And that could mean only one thing. From as much as he had learned about his opponent, it could mean only one thing right now. She was an Uzumaki. So the thing underneath his feet was in fact a seal, rushing out the dark alley to escape it. His eyes didn't lose their widened state when he frantically stared back and forth the path to see the whole middle street covered in kanji. In fact, if his guess was right, then the range of this technique covered this entire village. A village-wide sealing technique. I was in checkmate as soon as I entered this damn village. His mind screamed in anguish and defeat, but he took a calming breath. No point in thinking of the obvious. What would Tobarama do if he were here? What was the right course he could take? He couldn't escape the village in time. Any second now she'd activate her technique and he would most likely be trapped like a hamster in her palms. And seals were a powerful asset if the caster had the time to prepare it firsthand. She certainly had taken her time for this, seeing she did in fact go through the lengths of covering the whole damn village in it. Every technique has a weakness. There are no exceptions. So, calm yourself down. Years ago, in a training ground when Tobarama had trapped him down in a low-level seal, he had been 6 if he remembered right. He had heard those words from the strict master. Analyze the technique, you have your Sharingan to help you, and a sharp mind to go with it. Accept that you are trapped. Break down the opponent's techniques, straight down to the basics, and devise the most suitable counter even if it isn't perfect. Your priority is containment of the technique and fortification of your survival, by any means necessary. He whispered the last of his mentor's words and closed his eyes for a moment before glaring down at the ground. He still had the advantage. He knew of her skills, but she didn't know of his as much as he did of hers. He had made sure of it and kept his reserves intact during their battle. She was an Uzumaki, so this was most probably an Uzumaki seal. And Uzumaki sealing techniques, he was well versed in. A small smile lit up his face even as the ground underneath his feet lit up. The kanji lit up, to be precise. But that was besides the point. Just before the kanji started wrapping up around his ankles, his hands formed the dog seal and held the boar seal while he felt himself getting paralyzed when he was covered head to toe in kanji. This is a high-level paralysis seal, Uzumaki sealing style, no doubt. I don't feel any pain, so no torture triggers. But I have lost all control over my body. It is cutting off my consciousness from the rest of my body to paralyze me in place and anyone else who might be in range. She most probably needs me alive for some reason or the other. His summarizing ended when the source of all his problems appeared from the corner of the streets in all her glory. Now, with the light here illuminating his enemy a lot more than before, he could see her crimson hair going down her hips and her violet eyes that were a lot more darker than Mito's. He noted to confirm him of her heritage. But the menacing smile on her lips was almost palpable. He couldn't let her do whatever it was she wanted with him. He would most probably die, or worse, Naruto-kun. Her soft coo made his heart twist in agony when she was within a foot's distance in front of him. She knew his name, now that was truly bad. Holding on to his composure as best as he could, he was quite glad that his Sharingan and the chakra he had molded were still intact. She had been careless enough not to put in chakra suppression seals in the sealing matrix. Granted, the seal matrix would have become a lot more taxing with sub-elementary seals included, seeing the scale of her technique. But it was better to be safe than to be sorry in his opinion. And by the pride of his teacher's teachings, she was going to be sorry for this little mistake. Her violet eyes adoringly stared into his menacing crimson ones while he glared down at her with all his might. Helplessly, for the time being, he felt her hand sliding up from underneath his shirt and onto his skin in a manner that could be called harassingly seductive to some. Disgust didn't even begin to describe what he felt when she pressed her lips onto his cheek for a kiss before letting her tongue do its work on it. Slowly and almost painfully, to him at least. I'll have so much fun breaking you. That is, before I unleash your true potential, my love. Her soft purr in his ear didn't ease him in the slightest. He prayed with all his might that his counter technique worked. The molded chakra responded from this hand seal while he wasn't molding it consciously. And he prayed she didn't open that hand seal. It was all he could do for now. More like he couldn't do anything more than to will it awake by conjuring up all his spiritual energy into triggering his technique. Just a trigger, that was all it was going to take. He didn't even flinch when a chain pierced his abdomen, shying a hair length from fatally wounding his liver, while she clawed her nails into his chest to draw a few trickles of blood. Tobarama had made sure that pain didn't affect him in the slightest, and the man was downright sadistic in that department. He had been quite thorough in the pain endurance training his disciple had been put through out of Mito's knowledge. The man didn't want him losing a fight because he couldn't endure some pain. This wasn't even training if he compared to how Tobarama would rip him apart through various ways when he had been merely a little child. Well, now that he thought about those days, it could be called torture endurance training if he was honest with himself. Nonetheless, his master had been right. It was coming in handy today. You really are my type. Not even flinching from pain. Yes, now I see what he sees in you. Another chain stabbed his right shoulder with her words, but he was unfazed. It was only a matter of time. But he was storing away all this information for the time being. She wasn't the only one, someone had sent her. But you could act like you're in pain. She whined childishly, hugging him like a teddy bear while he bled from his wounds quite a bit when she pulled the chains out from his body. She let him bleed for a while longer. He didn't need to be dead per se, just a little close to it would be fine. Yeah, that would do it. When she sighed in defeat, he sighed in relief on the inside. But his eyes did widen seeing her pull out a small syringe from her frock's pocket. The black thing filled up in its glass vial sure didn't look like she was giving him a vaccine for cold. That was for sure. And he sure as hell didn't want that non-prescribed injection to be stabbed in his body right now. Let's unleash your potential then and cut straight to the chase. I've prepped you up quite enough. No point in killing you. It would be such a waste. He knew that those stabs were the preparations she was referring to. As soon as her free palm cupped his neck while she let her other hand pull the syringe closer to his neck, he knew he had run out of time. But just in the nick of time, his trigger came and he smirked, confusing the girl quite a bit at the sudden change of emotions he was displaying. Was he starting to enjoy this just like her? That would be fun. She mused while putting a finger on her chin in thought. Lightning style dash, he rasped out. Her eyes widened when she heard those two words, but it was too late for her to react to what followed next. Willing the huge amount of chakra he had conjured up beforehand, his hand seal converting it into lightning chakra all the while she was marinating him. He let it go in inwardly, into his nervous system to be exact. Many would find his actions suicidal in the current situation, but the line between crazy and genius was a fine one indeed. At least he believed it to be so. It was a matter of opinion in all honesty. A silent scream escaped his lips when each and every nerve in his body was jolted by thousands of volts of electricity as his technique was activated from the inside out. Pain endurance or not, though it was only thanks to that he was still conscious, it hurt like hell. Cocking his fist up to the stupefied girl's stomach, he buried it and expelled his conjured-up lightning chakra straight into her body. The violent spasms of her body did make him smile a bit, if only for a bit. She had after all dared to do those disgusting things to him. No one touched him like that, and he let the conjured chakra burst in a focused beam to throw her back and away from him. But how can you move? Her pained whisper didn't even prompt him to answer her, while he cracked his sore neck that she had gripped like a log not even a moment ago. Watching her curling up into a ball, no doubt in pain, he felt no remorse, just indifference. Now she would know it did hurt, even if he didn't show it. Still covered in the kanji of her technique, Naruto walked proudly, hiding any signs of the enormous pain he was experiencing each moment now, and increased the chakra input into his technique. Her high-level paralysis seal was still activated, but he was moving as if nothing was wrong with him, at least not on the outside. Blue lightning sparkled around him in a show of glowing sparks. A small booming thunder echoed in the streets, while his hair stood a little from the static he had let out as soon as it reached its peak voltage. You don't have to know how, just know that I did. With that said, he bolted off. Literally, he ran off in a bolt of lightning, his insane speedy movements leaving a trail of blue light behind him. Naruto knew he didn't have much time. As soon as he would let this draining technique drop, he'd pass out from shock at the pain he was experiencing right now. Otherwise, he would have stopped to finish her off. But tomorrow was another day. Even if he could subdue the pain for now, it did affect his body and especially his mind as much as it would any other person. His nervous system was now connected to his subconscious mind, and that was what had him running on his primal instincts right now. The inward jolt had served to complete its purpose. He was faster, had insane reactive instincts, and coupled with his Sharingan, he was nigh untouchable. But as with every technique, it had its drawbacks. As soon as he'd let his technique drop, he would pass out from the pain. It was a crude imitation of the revered lightning armor wielded by the Nidaime Raikage. But he didn't have the inhumanely resilient body the Raikage possessed to endure the strain of this technique. To think, the man used this with his much more potent black lightning and wasn't even affected by it. Naruto envied that man's resilient body. This was the reason that even if one could replicate the man's technique, no one else could use it without this huge of a drawback. Had he had that kind of a body, his nerve synapses electrocuted with this technique to create involuntary and blinding reactions of their own accords to anything considered dangerous would make it the perfect technique for him. With the Sharingan to go along with it, he knew only the Hiraishin would be able to trump him in combat. But it was a moot point. Something impossible just wasn't possible. But he did have this fail-safe in case he got trapped like he just had and had to run out. After all, he was covering 10 minutes worth of distance at normal speeds in a minute and a half, give or take. But for the time being, especially against paralysis techniques, he had devised it to be the Achilles heel against every damn one of them, be it ninjutsu or fuinjutsu. But Tobarama had forbidden him from using it completely. Seeing how much he damaged his nervous system in its aftermath after its trial run a couple of years back, Naruto scoffed inwardly. His mentor really was to talk about forbidden techniques. The point itself was laughable. He was a walking scroll labeled boldly as forbidden from top to bottom. Half a mile outside the village, Naruto saw two familiar figures and sighed in relief when his eyes saw who the two silhouettes really were. He was running out of chakra after having kept it up for 15 minutes already. And had he mentioned that it hurt like a bitch? He probably had, but it did hurt like a bitch. That was a fact. Due and Tsukumo almost fell down on their faces when a bolt of lightning thundered down in front of them with a deafening boom. Both blinked owlishly, seeing Naruto powering down his technique while the sparks surrounding him disappeared. His hair remained in their position though. One of the reasons he didn't like using this technique, mind you, and the black dots in his vision came up almost right at that moment as his eyes reverted back to their blue counterparts and Due caught him from falling face first into the ground. "Run," was his last whisper to his friend before unconsciousness claimed him. Tsukumo and Due didn't need to be told twice. Both boys bolted off, straight to Konoha with no signs of taking any stops in between, almost without a thought. Seeing Naruto being carried like that on Dewey's shoulder, Tsukumo felt a deep regret for not even being able to go for help when he had most probably fought the battle of his life. Dewey's crimson spandex-covered shoulder that was wet from Naruto's bleeding and tapered body did increase that feeling tenfold. He had been right. That fool just did not listen. "I told that reckless idiot not to go." His soft mutter was picked on by Due, who smiled sadly, seeing the pain and regret flashing in Tsukumo's eyes that he was failing so miserably to hide. But he wouldn't be Naruto if he didn't. "Our friend is just too youthful to listen to you, Tsukumo." Yash! Even in this situation, Tsukumo couldn't stop the laugh he let out hearing Due return back to his energetic self, especially that Yash part. Even unconscious and bleeding, none of which were fatal, for which he was thankful for, did Naruto stop making troubles for him. And it was then that Tsukumo finally realized one thing. "But I would have to make the report when we get back." The joyful laugh that Due let out hearing that made Tsukumo want to murder his teammates himself. "Konohagakure no Sado, Hokage Tower, Council Chambers. What about the events that took place within the village?" The question asked quite simply did no justice to the amount of silent tension that had built up within these esteemed chambers of the Hokage Tower. "I found it prudent not to enter so recklessly and stayed back. Might Due too was convinced with my argument, so we didn't enter. Since we did not go, I cannot answer what exactly took place within the village. The only one who can answer that question is Naruto Uchiha." As curt and brief as he could, Tsukumo answered and stood stiffly in front of the top officials of the village. He was feeling the pressure of being in front of almost every official's scrutinizing eyes while they went over his mission report numerous times. It didn't help that they were pointing out each and every small detail to each other, which went on in small whispers that, much to Tsukumo's dismay, were inaudible to him. "Did you try and stop him?" Before Tsukumo could answer, the Hyuga clan head interrupted him with a small condition of his own. "Just a yes/no will suffice," he added sternly, and Tsukumo wanted to say that it wouldn't be a fair argument without an explanation, but relented in the end. He was but a mere genin, while they were the top officials within the village with surplus amounts of power right now. It would be a fool's choice to try and argue with any of them right now. "Yes, I did." Just like that, he felt as if he had hammered down the final nail over Naruto's coffin. The report he had made to them was rolled up right in front of his eyes and stacked with the others. All the whispers going on around the room ceased altogether and were replaced by little warm smiles that didn't fool him in the slightest. "Then I guess we should congratulate this genin." Akio Inuzuka broke the small tense silence and prompted several nods from the rest of them. Indeed. It was the Yamanaka clan head who had taken up the mantle to congratulate the boy for his success. "Your conduct was proper, as is expected of a team leader. You analyzed the situation astutely, made calm decisions, and never once lost your cool or rushed in to give away your position until it was absolutely necessary. A fine job under pressure, if I do say so myself. A shinobi must know when to retreat and try and save as many as he could. Relief washed over Tsukumo's face while his tense shoulders loosened up a bit hearing that. That was a close call. Too close for comfort, but he was glad that everyone had come out. However, now that broke him out of his thoughts almost instantly. Your teammates' actions, I do not think should go unnoticed. Tsukumo did feel a sense of foreboding hearing that and gulped audibly seeing the small smiles that were threatening to break out on each of their faces. It almost seemed as if they were enjoying this. He just didn't know how close he was to the truth. I am bumping up this mission's rank to be, please collect your payments for the mission. Walking up to the mission's desk, Tsukumo did collect the payment scrolls. This wasn't assigned by any client. It came under the jurisdiction of the village's internal affairs, so they had all rights to do as they pleased with its outcomes. But one thing was odd. He mulled inwardly when eyed the scroll in his palms with a hint of confusion flashing across his face. Sir, there are only 2? He asked more than said. And it didn't look like they had made any mistake from the innocent looks plastered on each of their faces. Yes, that is yours and Might Dewey's. We'll hold on to Naruto Uchiha's payment and the rectification of his actions until he is here to explain his side of the story. Personally. The last word was spoken with added emphasis, and Tsukumo wanted to argue. After all, what the hell had Due and he himself actually done to deserve this raised payment for a mission where all they had done was travel to and fro between locations? It was Naruto who had rushed into enemy lines, it was he who had fought, whoever it was he had fought. And even if it was a mistake on his part, he deserved the payment much more than them if they were getting paid. He absolutely needed that money, and there were numerous reasons he could speak of without even thinking about them. How the hell would Naruto be paying for his living expenses? Much less the medical bills that were racking up at the hospital? Didn't these fools know he had to pay for every damn thing himself? Being an orphan along with a legal adult in the eyes of this village, he had no one to rely on. Even Due was better off than him simply because of the support he had from his parents who were involved in small merchant businesses in the village. He opened his lips for a small protest of reason, but was cut off almost before he had even let a whisper slip past his lips. That will be all. You are dismissed. Pursing his lips and clenching the scroll tightly in his palms, Tsukumo walked out without a word. He ignored the orders they were giving out to the new team of Chunin being sent out to recover the corpses from the fallen village. He was far too engrossed in his own thoughts right now to care about anyone. In the end, it was only Naruto who had taken the heat for this mission, while Due and himself alone had reaped the fruits of his labor by sticking back from the danger and carrying his torn body back to the village. For some reason, he didn't feel like getting paid for a mission rather than the guy who had essentially done damn everything on his own. But that really was his heart speaking, even he knew that. Logically, they had done everything perfectly well. Naruto had been selfish and foolish by leaving them back and going in like that. It was only a miracle that he and Due had come out of this unscathed by doing the right thing. So, with a heavy payment scroll and an even heavier heart, the silver-haired boy made his way to the hospital where his teammates were to pay a visit to that damn fool who was the primary cause of his self-loathing right now. Well, as Sensei always says, missions don't always go as planned. He consoled himself. Tsukumo, at the very least, hoped that Naruto hadn't injured himself beyond repair for such an unpretentious thing. Meanwhile, Konoha Hospital. Miss. Due couldn't help but squirm a little while standing in front of the regal-looking woman who was looking at him quite flatly. She had healed his friend, but even still she was making him quite nervous with that blank look on her eyes. It wasn't that he hadn't seen her before, he had. Each time he had been with Naruto, so he had gotten to see her warm side and even a couple of pats to his head. And this was far from the woman he remembered seeing in the past. Is he all right? He asked a little meekly to try and change the subject and at least get some sort of life in this dead-looking corridor of the hospital. It was an irony in itself, the loudest member of Squad 7 speaking like a frightened rabbit. The idea itself was laughable. Due had wanted it to come out polite, but this was all he could manage for now given the circumstances. Yes, now that relieved him, even if only a little. If he had used that technique any longer, then surely it would have had some lasting effects. But he is fine for now. Mito couldn't even begin to describe her feelings at this point. One minute she was having a peaceful sleep in her room. The next moment Due had frantically barreled into her house, saying Naruto needed her. At the hospital no less, and the blonde boy she adored so much was in a condition she hadn't expected to see him in even in her wildest dreams. Apart from those gaping holes in his right shoulder and lower abdomen, her examination had left her dumbfounded. Thankfully, those holes at least were at non-fatal points, but that was all that could be called good news. Each and every nerve, and the nerve count in a human body was no joke, was strained to the point of almost collapsing. The effects largely resembled to ones that had been seen in someone getting shocked from a high-level lightning technique during intense combat. But this was like someone had kept it over him relentlessly without a break, just like torturers used on prisoners at the T&I department, only without the restraints they used so as to not kill them before milking out every damn word out of their mouths, which, for an element as offensive and draining as lightning, was completely unheard of. No one, and that meant absolutely no one, ever used such a technique on themselves. So, her curiosity as to what exactly had occurred on that mission was quite reasonable. What technique was he using? Her sudden question made Due blink out of his stupor. The boy, who had his palms on the small glass in Naruto's door and was trying and failing to glance a peek at his downed friend, thought about what he had seen for a moment. I don't really know. The narrowing of Mito's eyes didn't help his nervous case any. That was for sure. But he wasn't lying. He hadn't ever seen an electrically charged human like that before. He was running at blinding speeds. I've never seen him go that fast, to be honest. Now that did surprise her. She herself knew the boy she was talking to was no slouch in speed himself, even though Naruto was blindingly fast if he needed to be more so than this green boy in front of her. But that didn't answer her question, and it annoyed her to no end. So before her wrath fell on Due, the boy tried to plead his case as much as he could lest he become her target and primary focus for venting out her frustrations. He was covered in lightning from head to toe. I mean, really, he was glowing. Emphasizing his point by showing his own body like a stripper of sorts, he felt quite stupid. But anything was better than facing an angry woman, in his opinion. You mean literally? The sheepish look her gave her cemented that she was right and did help the boy who was trying and failing to explain his sentence and thereby his case. A lot. I see. His long sigh upon hearing that did show her that he had nothing else to add. But Mito could devise the rest on her own. Naruto was quite possibly electrocuting himself from the inside out to achieve that extraordinary feat. It was quite a genius tactic in her opinion, but it didn't make her turn any less livid right now for the after effects of said technique. The boy was not built like a tank. He was a quick and agile child, always relying on his instincts and speed much more than he did on brute strength and power. If she was completely honest, he looked like he would be happy each time he would win while doing as little as he could. One could call that lazy, but Tobarama, his mentor, called that efficient. She, however, knew the truth a bit more than him. Naruto always avoided conflict as much as he could. So to finish off a fight like that or run away when he had the chance to was exactly what she would expect from him. But running away in this manner was a different matter altogether. Oi! 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 Dewey's bouncing form broke her thoughts. Right before her fist could bonk the boy gently to chastise and remind him he was in a hospital of all places, she saw his sparkling eyes and grew a little confused herself. He moved! Her eyes widened hearing that. It just wasn't possible. The boy had been out cold from pure shock at the immense pain he had endured due to his technique. He shouldn't be able to wake up, much less move, for at least 2 days straight right now. That was on top of the point that she had just given him a really high dose of some mild tranquilizing sedatives. No more than a couple of hours ago. But her mulling was cut short when another shout rang loud in the silent hallways they resided within. Bei-chan? She wanted to scold and bonk everyone here to remind them that this was a damn hospital. Only then did she realize that only 2 people in the whole world called her that. One was right now in the room she was just in an hour ago and quite possibly unconscious. So that only left Tsunade. Before she could finish, her granddaughter had cut her off. Where is he? In but a moment Mito knew the girl was quite aware of her friend's condition. Glancing slightly behind the girl, she saw an apologetic-looking Tsukumo rubbing his head sheepishly. Well, that answered that. He's in this room. Due, answered the girl dumbly while pointing a finger at the door in front of him. And before Mito could even realize what had happened, Tsunade was already closing the door to said room behind her. The redhead's heart almost popped right out of her chest while her eyes went wide in shock. Honestly, none of these people had any restraint whatsoever, which was proved when she caught Dewey's scarf while he too had found it prudent to follow Tsunade's incentive and go visit his friend who had just come out of surgery, mind you. No visitors allowed. Her stern tone left no room for argument. Like a little kitten, she picked him up by his scarf and placed him by Sakumo's side to go in and take Tsunade out of the room the same way. Then she would have to drill in some etiquette and common sense into these two hyperactive children of hers. Mito had expected her granddaughter to be shouting out profanities at the boy, hugging him to death or anything close to those two. But what she hadn't expected was her little girl sitting down by the chair kept to his bedside. She looked as calm as a shadow while her palms rested on her thighs. Seeing her so calm and silent was rather odd. The girl was bursting forth with surplus energy even after enduring some sort of strenuous activity at the end of the day. It was all thanks to her own genes passed on to her granddaughter that gave her the legendary stamina, which nearly all Uzumakis were generally renowned for. Tsunade? No reaction came from the girl, so she tried again. Honey? The girl's sudden quiet attitude was honestly worrying her, as was evident by the hesitance in her whispering soft voice. Walking right behind her granddaughter and clasping the girl's shoulder to make her presence known. Only then did she see the small glittering drops rolling down her cheeks when she realized. The girl was crying silently. He's so hurt. Hearing her child's soft sniffle made her grandmother's heart ache. But it was to be expected seeing how bad Naruto looked right now. It isn't as bad as it looks, sweetie. Mito cooed the girl to calm her down. She herself knew what anyone would think seeing him right now. Head to toe was he wrapped up in bandages, looking akin to a mummy more so than a breathing human. But it was only due to the surgery she had gone through to repair his nervous system that he was looking this way. It wasn't needed in the first place. His condition hadn't really been severe enough to warrant a surgery. But she knew that in order to have a peaceful sleep in her eyes at night, she needed to be absolutely sure of the boy's safety. Thus came the need for a complete surgery. Mito rubbed Tsunade's head soothingly and wiped her wet cheeks from behind to calm her girl down. I leave him alone for a day and he does that. That reckless idiot. Her cracking voice was barely an inch away from turning into a cry, and Mito could feel that she was holding herself back, feeling all her protectiveness wash over her. The Uzumaki heiress wrapped the girl up in her arms from behind and pressed her lips on top of Tsunade's head for a soft peck. So you don't care? She was teasing her. Of course the girl was worried. Why else would she be crying? But anything to take her worries and turn them into a laugh would be a welcome proposition right now. Of course I don't care. It did surprise Mito on what she was hearing. The girl's words truly did contradict her actions, it seemed. Who the hell does he think he is? I don't care if he lives or if he. Mito placed her fingers on her lips and hushed the stubborn girl up when her voice finally cracked and she let out a soft cry. However much she tried to hide, these two were just way too connected to not worry about each other. Bachan, let go. Mito was shocked when the girl started wriggling out of her grip as if she were the plague. But only then did she see Naruto's slightly moving hand and his flickering eyelids in this dark room. But how dash? She, though, in shock and utter despair. Dewey wasn't imagining it. He really is moving. She would have screamed had she not been mindful of her surroundings. Naru, hey Naru? Mito went to stop the boy when he tried to raise his shaky hand up. It was shaking like a dry leaf right now. His whole nervous system was punctured due to the internal surgery she had performed on him herself. He might hurt himself even more, not counting the pain even a twitch of his fingers would cause him right now. But seeing what was taking place right before her eyes, she almost felt like crying a moment later, seeing him clasp Tsunade's hand in his own bandaged one, even when he obviously was out cold. His eyes weren't even focused. Clearly her sedatives had worked perfectly. He had merely woken up for a moment and, from her guess, would fall unconscious any moment now as far as she could surmise. But to see her two babies, the same ones she had seen grow up right before her very eyes in that moment, seeing his unfocused eyes staring into Tsunade's worried glittering ones in that darkly lit room. Mito wanted to cherish that moment in her memory forever. Their bond was indeed a special one. She had known it for a long time now. Hell, even Tobarama had known it, and he was the epitome of dumb when it came to matters of feelings and emotions. She wanted to laugh at the same time too, though. The only ones who probably hadn't realized it were the two involved blondes themselves. It really was rather ironic in itself if one delved deeply into the matter. Sleep. I'll watch over you tonight. Tsunade's soft whisper made Mito blink off a small tear from her tear ducts. A feeling of pure sadness washed over Mito seeing her granddaughter like that. It was almost as if the girl was radiating an aura of pure sadness. Not that couldn't be it, could it? For the Senju heiress herself, she was far too concerned about her friend to care about the world right now. Not even more than a few days ago he was watching over her. And now here he was looking like he had been thrown into a grinder of sorts, out like a light from the realms of consciousness. Mito, for all that was holy, didn't want to disturb her little ones at that point of time. But that was just her heart speaking. Her mind was still open to reason. However hard it was to focus, but that was besides the point. Sweetie. Mito cooed the girl gently, and failed to get so much as a twitch of acknowledgement from the girl in her arms. We need to let him rest. Let's go. Mito almost gasped when Tsunade glanced back at her. No, not at her. It almost seemed as if the girl was seeing right through her. Tsunade's eyes were downright murderous, and unknowingly her killing intent washed over the room. The killing intent didn't even faze Mito in the slightest. It was the apparition of a vision she had just seen manifesting itself right by her little girl that had shook her to her very core. Hashirama Senju. She had seen that look before. It was the same look her husband had held on that accursed day, many decades ago. She had buried that godforsaken memory in the deepest recesses of her mind to forget about it altogether. But it had come back to haunt her full force yet again, in a matter she hadn't thought possible even in her wildest dreams. The man had the same look in his eyes when she had lost her unborn son due to, it still pained her heart to even remember it. But to see that dreaded look in her granddaughter's eyes left her utterly speechless. I'll stay with him. Her cold voice once more sent a tremor straight to Mito's core. Wordlessly, the elder woman nodded. She knew the girl wasn't in any state to listen, let alone obey what she might say or reason to her. But to think she was so furious right now. Mito knew the girl would fight even her to stay, if need be. Tsunade turned her cold eyes back to her friend, and immediately they softened considerably while worry washed in them. She felt her hair being drifted off to her right shoulder from a soft touch on the back of her neck, no doubt by her grandmother. But she paid no heed to it and caressed Naruto's hand with her thumb as gently as she could. However, she felt quite strange upon feeling a soft poke at the back of her neck. Before she could even try to turn her neck or comprehend what had actually happened, she felt a small jolt at the point of contact. Her honey-colored orbs rolled back in their sockets, while she slumped back in Mito's warm embrace completely unconscious. It was marvelous what a small lightning technique could do in the hands of an expert medical kunoichi. I'm sorry, honey, but he needs his rest. Speaking more to herself than to the girl in her arms, Mito undid the grip her two children held with their hands as gently as she possibly could. A moment later, the little slumped girl was scooped up in her arms while she walked out, but not before throwing a worried glance back at Naruto and then down at the sleeping Tsunade in her arms. She smiled warmly and closed the door behind her. Her children were just such handfuls. She might just shave a few years if she had to put up with these troublesome ones like this any longer. Her giggle came out of its own accord when she thought over her own thoughts, softly kissing her adorable munchkin's nose. Mito quite enjoyed the irritated scrunching of Tsunade's face, while she nuzzled her face in her chest to hide from that annoying touch that disturbed her forced slumber so much. A tired sigh slipped past Mito's lips, seeing Tsukumo and Due waiting expectantly for her. He's fine now. She spoke up swiftly when both boys opened their lips to say something. You cannot see him right now. The way they slumped in defeat without so much as a whisper made her giggle happily. Go home for today. Come and see him tomorrow. I'll arrange for some visiting hours day after tomorrow when he is finally ready to wake up. All right? The two vigorous nods she got only served to widen her smile ever so slightly. walking out the hospital as gracefully as ever. Even while holding her child, she lost none of her ever-present grace she exuded almost involuntarily now. She did feel as if she had lived for over a year what all had been occurring in the past couple of weeks. Time could be such a strange entity sometimes. A couple of days later, everyone in the hospital smiled. The source of said happiness in such a gloomy place, one might ask? Well, a certain blonde kunoichi walking with a hop to her feet was the primary source of said reason. The cheerful smile she was flashing almost made everyone around her cheer up, and when she greeted someone passing her by, she earned a soft pat to her head from each of them. It was of no doubt to anyone in the village that everyone did adore their princess way too much, but everyone was eyeing the small serving pot in her hands a bit oddly. It was clearly one used for serving food, which it quite obviously contained. But what was off was the strange smell it was letting out. Ha! Now he can never say again that I've never done anything for him. Indeed, her friend was quite blunt when it came to speaking his heart, and he had said so on more than one occasion, but she had never minded it in the least. She knew that he didn't ever mean it with that playful smile always on his face, but it was still true, and that had annoyed her to no end. But today, even her grandmother had been pleased with what she was doing in the kitchen so early in the morning to prepare a home-cooked meal for her recuperating friend. But looking upwards to the ceiling, in all the innocence of the world, she couldn't quite comprehend the strange look her grandmother had given her when she had showed her the food she had made so diligently in the morning. But then, before she could ask her anything, she was pushed out the house, and it still left her baffled to no end. These old people were just too strange for her to understand. Seeing the room she had been looking for what felt like an eternity, a wide smile broke onto her face as she slid the door open enthusiastically. Naruto, look, I brought you. An imaginary breeze flew in the room when she saw it completely devoid of any sins of life. Some food. She whispered to no one in particular with an innocent blink. Stepping in, she looked around in the bathroom, then under the bed, behind the flower vase by the corner. Then she felt quite stupid. She was looking for her friend, not some bug. Only then did a look of enlightening realization dawned over her face, and her face changed from one of honest confusion to one of righteous fury in no more than the blink of an eye. That annoying, no good idiot! She hissed angrily when she realized what exactly must have happened. I'm going to annihilate him this time, I swear. Her snarl was accompanied by her slamming the door behind her. Every patient on the floor glanced out their windows to see the chirpy girl they had seen a moment ago turn downright murderous. She started stomping her way out of the hospital while gritting her teeth in annoyance. How the hell could she forget that damned idiot hated hospitals like the plague? He was infamous for escaping them just as soon as that annoying pest she considered her friend was able to get on his feet. She didn't even need to ask the help desk for where he had gone off to after being released. She knew too damn well to know where he was off to right now. Uchiha clan compounds. Open the damn door. I swear I'm going to break it down in 5 seconds flat. Naruto tried to get to the door as fast as he possibly could in his condition. He knew that voice all too well. It was Tsunade, an angry Tsunade, and an angry Tsunade was never a good Tsunade. That does it? The absolutely livid kunoichi cocked her fist back, her patience having run out completely by that point. Fully intent on smashing the door right out the other sides of the estate, she let her fist go forward. When, much to her surprise and horror, the door opened. Naruto's baby blue orbs were wide in shock seeing a fist mere millimeters from his face. He could sense the soft humming chakra it had still laced on its tip. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple while he gulped thickly. That was a close call. A little too close for comfort. On a good day, he would have let his instincts kick in and slap her hand away to the side while watching it come closer to his face in slow motion, courtesy of his Sharingan. But he couldn't have dodged that in his given condition. So remembering all that, he had been lucky. When he saw her face, he realized he was only lucky of sorts. Tsunade let out a soft yelp when he pulled her in the house by her arm and closed the door in the blink of an eye. Her own eyes went wide when his palm slapped onto the wall by the side of her head, and she saw Naruto lean down closer to her face. You came all alone, huh? So early in the morning, too. His voice was strange, and she knew what he was trying to do. You do realize that people might get the wrong idea if you keep this up, right? On any other day, she would have blushed and went down into a mumbling mess in flow with his trickery. But today wasn't any other day. She slapped her hand over his forehead, which, just as she had expected, was burning like a stove. I knew it! I fucking knew it! A tick mark appeared over her forehead when he let out a soft sigh. He always tried to tease and embarrass her whenever she was onto him doing something like this to work his way out of the situation. So it's true that you forced them to let you leave the hospital, she hissed. He really was an idiot. Only then did she see him sweating like crazy even in such a cool weather. On closer inspection, she could see him barely standing by the support of his palm that was by her head while his legs trembled like dry leaves. "Oi, don't stress yourself so much." She wrapped her arms around his chest to support and hug him at the same time. "Come now, let's go to bed." Supporting him by pulling an arm over her shoulder, she scurried him upstairs and straight into his room. "I'm fine." His plead fell on deaf ears when she forcefully laid him down onto his futon and tucked him in it like a child. "I'll go and get some ice, water and towels," she mumbled, half angry, half tiredly, and he caught her wrist in a futile attempt to stop her. "I'll do it," was all he could say before she had pushed him down by his chest. "You will stay in bed." Her voice left no rooms for argument, and he relented with an annoyed grunt, which was ignored completely by her. "Tsunade, really? I'm all right." He tried to plead to her. She didn't have to do this, but her patience had already thinned to the point of snapping right at that instant. "You will stay in bed." Her sudden shout shocked him completely. Her own angry eyes softened seeing him looking at her in such a stunned manner, and she tenderly cupped his cheek in her palm. "Just let yourself heal." Her whisper was almost pleading, and for the life of him, he couldn't say no to such a sad face. Silently nodding, he laid back down while she once more tucked the blanket up to his neck and went out to go fetch the items she had picked out for him in her mind. Naruto watched her return and said nothing while she placed a bowl full of cold water with some floating ice cubes being placed by his side. She picked out some hand towels from his closet and sat down by his side. Dipping one into the bowl, she wrapped up a couple of ice cubes in it and placed it on his forehead. "Why did you run out of the hospital?" she asked, and he fell silent for a moment there. How was he to tell her that the nurse had come up to him with a bill that he had hardly been able to pay with all he currently had on him? Or else he was threatened to being thrown out if he was unable to pay for their services any further. So to save himself some of his little to non-existent self-dignity by that point, he had left. It was the primary reason he hated hospitals. They ate money like snacks even for a small fever. And no one ever wanted him around for any more than what was absolutely necessary. But she didn't need to know that. "I was bored." He lied smoothly, but she caught on to it almost instantly. She knew the reason too, as much as he could try and hide it. She would always see through him in the end. He never could lie to her. Picking up another towel, she went on to change it with a sad smile. "You are a terrible liar, Naru." Her soft whisper made him tear his eyes away from her. He hated lying to her with his very being, but he absolutely despised showing her his vulnerabilities and worrying her so much. He wasn't worth it. He never really was worth her. "Why didn't you call for me or Bachan?" she asked him earnestly while placing the new towel over his forehead. "It was unnecessary," he answered simply, and she let out a soft sigh. That annoying Baka was just too reckless for his own good sometimes. No, almost all the time. But for the life of her, even after seeing his skin so pale and eyes so tired, she couldn't, for the life of her, be angry at him. "Have you eaten yet?" Her voice was gentle and caring while she brushed away the wet locks coming over his eyes, though her eye twitched when he looked even farther away with a small huff, one that made her feel quite stupid for asking such a ridiculous question. Of course he hadn't, but he could answer her out of courtesy at the very least. All right, now stop moping. I brought you some breakfast. I'll go and heat it up, since it did turn cold in the time it took me to find you." Her voice was accusing towards the end. She cocked her hip to the side and placed a palm on it, trying to copy her grandmother to a large extent, but ultimately failed miserably in her endeavor. So in the end she had to relent in defeat when he didn't so much glance at her, instead finding the scenery outside his window quite prudently refreshing. He did hear her sigh and get up, and she didn't see the small smile he had while he looked back out the window once more to enjoy the scenery outside after he had eyed her walking out his room quite intently out of her eyeshot. He really was glad she was here. She came back with her steaming pot from the morning, now without its lid. And Naruto could discern the smell of rice that hit his nostrils, which made him glance at her, while she sat down by his futon and pulled her legs to the left side of her thighs. He rose an eyebrow seeing the contents of the serving pot. "What's this?" he couldn't help but ask, and she gave him a cheeky smile while pouring down its steaming contents into a serving bowl. "It's rice porridge. I made it myself in the morning." Naruto did smile seeing her puff out her chest in pride and got up shakily by support of his elbows. She tried to hand him the bowl when he rose an eyebrow at her, much to her honest confusion. So he decided to put an end to it hastily enough. "I can't use my arms properly, you will have to feed me," he lied smoothly, and this time the girl didn't catch on to his deception. The Senju heiress blushed a gentle pink hue over her cheeks and nodded dumbly. It was just so embarrassing, but what could she do? He was hurt and needed her like he had always been there for her. It was the least she could do for him. Naruto decided to spice up this rare chance he had gotten a bit more while smirking ever so slightly like a cunning fox. She was just way too easy to tease. "Oh, and I'm sensitive to hot food, just like Kiera." The slight insinuation to his words wasn't lost to Tsunade. Her blush turned a bright crimson, and she nodded while steaming out from her head in embarrassment. Once more, there was nothing she could do, so no retort came from her side, much to his happiness and her eternal chagrin. Picking up a spoonful of the rice porridge, she blew over it softly a couple of times and placed it near his lips, which he ate quite happily. She kept trying with all her might to hide her blush with her bangs almost desperately. The extent of his teasing would increase exponentially if he so much as caught a glance of her embarrassment. She couldn't have that. Absolutely not. So, she clearly was excited. He could see it clearly when she leaned forwards while expecting some sort of review of her handmade food from his side. "You've overcooked it, the rice is turned into a white soup of sorts." She gave him an odd look upon hearing that, almost believing that he was making fun of her. But looking at the steaming hot bowl on her lap, even she had to admit that it looked like a little, white goo of sorts upon closer inspection. No wonder her grandmother was acting a little strange in the morning, she realized in all the conjured-up innocence of the world. She blew another spoonful and fed him, with which he pondered on further to scrutinize how it was that it truly tasted to him. She didn't want to hear any more of his critical review though. "I get it, I suck at cooking. Now shut up and eat." Her tone was completely irritated while she fed him another spoonful, which he ate silently with an obedient nod. No point in raging her when he himself wasn't in any condition to escape her wrath if she did snap. Tsunade meanwhile kept twisting the spoon in the bowl a couple of times. All the while she mulled on what he had just said to her no more than a moment ago. And she really didn't want to ask, but she did at the same time. It was just so confusing to her, as was evident by the lost look currently plastered on her face. "Really?" Her whisper earned a raised eyebrow from his part. "What do you think of it? Tell me honestly, okay?" She mumbled softly while forcing another spoonful of her cooking down his throat. It was the first time she had cooked. Her grandmother had pestered her to try her hand at it, but she had never gotten around to it after she had been told it would come in handy post-marriage time. It was yucky to her at that point. She had been a child then, even going so much as to prefer power bars over learning cooking in her younger years. "I'm speechless." She looked up with sparkling eyes. She needed to hear more of that and then brag to everyone about her awesome cooking, especially to her grandmother. "I never knew there was a way to completely kill the natural flavor of food." She almost fell flat on her face quite comically when he had decided to dash down her hopes almost instantly. But she wasn't surprised by it in the slightest. That idiot always was as blunt as a hammer. She loved and hated that side of his at the same time. So picking up yet another spoonful of some soup, she almost lost the spoon in his throat when she pushed it forcefully into his face. "Just shut up and eat." Her stern tone halted all their conversations, and all that was heard was the soft clinking of utensils and her soft blows she made to cool down the soup each time to avoid burning his sensitive lips. And before Tsunade knew it, the bowl, and much to her surprise, the whole serving pot was completely empty. Keeping it to the side, She tasted a bit from what was left in it, and almost winced when she realized he had been much kinder in his summarizing than what was the truth. It was fucking horrible. Then why did you eat it all, you idiot? She whispered much more to herself than him, but with how silent the room was he did pick up on it out of her senses. Plus, if you can eat all that, then I guess I shouldn't have worried so much. Once more her soft mumbles were caught on by Naruto, who looked out the window once more to ponder over her words. How can I leave leftovers? She looked back stunned, quite surprised that he had heard her whispers. It was the first time I've had my princess's home cooking. He earnestly answered her and she looked away, resembling a ripe tomato upon hearing his words. He was such an idiot. You should get changed. She needed to change the subject. And she needed to change it now. You must be drenched with sweat. She whispered and forced down her blush to look back at him with a bright smile. Then, as oblivious as ever, oh, actually you can't use your hands to unbutton yourself. Here, let me help you. Without so much as a thought, she started undoing the buttons to his nightshirt. After undoing two, she stopped and placed a palm on his chiseled and bandaged chest when her mind finally caught on to her actions while she clenched her eyes shut in agony. And when she looked up, she was half expecting to see his amused eyes and yet another tease, only to gaze into those blue eyes she loved so much to be a strangely intense shade of azure that made her heart flutter. It was almost as if by looking right into her own shimmering golden ones, he was boring right into her very soul. His eyes looked much more dominating and intimidating than his Sharingan ever could be to her, and upon feeling so vulnerable and nervous, she also realized the position they were in. She was sitting smack bang in between his legs. Her palms rested on his chest while he was half undressed. Well, talk about awkward. What the hell are you looking at me like that for? She slapped his face gently to the side, forcing him to look out the window that he loved to do so much, and continued on undoing his shirt before pulling it off his bandaged torso to save herself from any more embarrassing situations. And only then did she see his shaking shoulders while Naruto himself tried to rein in his laughs but failed miserably in doing so. What's so damn funny? That was it. With her annoyed remark, the dam broke and he laughed his heart out. You're... He clenched his stomach when it hurt a bit, much to her annoyance and slight worry. But he continued on. Just like those idiotic and punks we fight all the damn time in bandit camps. You get all mad whenever I make eye contact with you, and get so pissed off, was all he could laugh out when she had picked up the pillow and started smashing him down with it. She herself couldn't rein in her laughs, and as much as she was loath to admit it, he was pretty spot on in his comparison. Their laughs rang in the large house while all life returned to its silent walls with rejuvenating vigor. But a moment later, her balance slipped when he pushed the pillow she was using as a hammer to the side to save himself, and she fell forward, flat on his chest. And when she tried to get up, a pair of arms wrapped her in a bear hug and stopped her from doing so. Naruto pleasantly petted her ponytail and kissed the side of her head tenderly to halt her wriggled momentarily. You're so sly, Nanachama. Always seducing me like this. She scowled at his teasing tone, but blushed at the same damn time. Scowled for the name he had given her. He had named her that when she had shown him her legendary losing streak years ago. It actually meant 7, which he sarcastically referred to her as his lucky 7, to remind and tease her for it even to this day. No one knew of this one other than them, and she intended to keep it that way until she went to her grave. You damn pervert, what do you mean sly? She whined softly, and it was nearly adorable how helpless she was right now due to not being able to use her incredible strength in fear of hurting him even more, for which he took full advantage of. Placing both her palms on his chest, she attempted to get up, but his hold didn't budge in the slightest. You're holding me down. Let go. She tried to wriggle out of his arms when he tightened his hold on her almost desperately. It did start worry her a little. Thank you. His honest whisper made a fond smile flash over her lips, and with a soft squeak she nodded and nuzzled her face in his neck. All intentions of trying to get up died along with it. She could feel it in her heart that he didn't want to let her go. And not that she would admit it out loud. She'd rather prefer torture than this admission to anyone. But she loved cuddles, especially with him. It had been that way ever since they were little, and she would sleep over at his place to stay the night. Naruto pushed off his shirt to the side and flipped the blanket up over them both. Both blondes cuddled next to each other with wide smiles, just like they had done for years on end now, while snuggling into comfortable little balls to enjoy their alone time. Right there, in each other's arms to keep each other warm. Tsunade did smile fondly when he lowered his face into her chest and hid himself in her arms. "You never need to thank me, Baka. I'm always here for you." Tsunade's cooing whisper fell on deaf ears when she saw him already breathing ever so softly and pulled him closer into her chest while softly kissing his head, her embrace turning into a protective one to console herself that he really was all right. He had her worried sick for 2 days straight. But now, after seeing that he really was fine with just a fever and some weakness, she could rest easy at night. Kiera came in and seeing her 2 favorite people sleeping, curled up over their blanket into a small ball and herself followed their example to have a small nap. It was only an excuse. She was just plain lazy. A week later, Naruto strapped on his sandals and stood up. Flexing his arms, he felt as good as he ever had. Kami thanked him. Mito had worked her magic over him, and after a relentless healing and rehabilitation schedule, he was out and ready to go wild before anyone would have thought possible. But he had to get back on missions soon. Savings were coming down to a new low, and he was quite possibly going to have to declare complete bankruptcy to his clan if it kept up for a few more days to put his house on mortgage and loan some money off of it. He definitely didn't want to do that. The elders of the clan and the village as a whole had been eyeing his house for a while now. But they had to know that this was just not for sale. He'd be damned before he let them even touch as much as a speck of dust over his property. But one little obstacle still stood glaring in his way: the council. Yup, today was the day he met those old coots to explain his side of the story. And, if at all possible, get his mission pay that was long since due, since he honestly could use the money. More like he really could use the money, but all that mattered to him right now was that he was up and kicking, and that thought alone made him smile. Being scooped up in a room all day, tied to a bed, it made him restless. It just wasn't him. He never liked being confined. Ever since he had been little, he enjoyed scouring out the unknown parts near the village that no one ever thought of visiting, to get an even deeper view into what really made this place so special that so many shinobi gave their lives to secure its tranquility and peace. And now that he had been given the clean chit, he rushed out his door swiftly, pumping chakra into the soles of his feet. He jumped up onto a roof with a joyful laugh. The wind softly rustled his golden locks that came near his adorable blue eyes, sparkling with a hint of mischief within them. The soft smell of leaves hit his nostrils, and he pumped up his lungs of his full of fresh air. He loved this. Absolutely loved this. This was freedom in his eyes, true freedom. And like a blur, he made his way to the place he didn't know the natural predator to his fine mood rested, looking forward to squishing it like an insignificant bug beneath its feet. Konoha no Sado, Konoha Hospital. Where did you even get this information from? Tobarama at this point was annoyed. No more than annoyed. He was infuriated. I have my ways. Tucking a lock behind her ear, Mito gave a sly smile to Tobarama, who was currently glancing at her with a distrustful look. Nonetheless, the information he had in the palm of his hands did anything but to please him. Even still, the point remained. Mission reports are supposed to be classified to the highest degree. I made sure of it. His voice was steely, and the iron in it showed Mito how displeased he truly was. Whether it was from the information itself or how she had gotten said information, she would never know. Aren't you forgetting something important? Sitting down by his side and placing her cheek in her palm, the Uzumaki heiress gave him the most innocent look she could conjure up in the spur of the moment. Sighing tiredly, Tobarama nodded. That I do. There were just some battles he could never win, no matter how strong or influential he got. It was just how it was, especially with women. And for all that was holy, the women in his household were truly the bane of his existence. As a matter of fact, now that he delved deeply into the matter, all of his family members, every single one of them, were a pain in the ass to deal with. Seeing her innocent smile, he frowned deeply in utter annoyance. Especially the women. They were the biggest pain of them all. Mito. He glowered down at his sister figure, whose innocent-looking face was presently irritating him to no ends. Tobarama. He gave her the chilliest look he could muster hearing that sarcastic coo, but much to his growing ire, she patted his cheek as if he were a mere child for her, which he probably was in her eyes. You have much more serious things to look into. Her caring voice made even his face melt down into a tired one. In the end, as loath as he was to admit it, she was right. He did have much to look into if the papers in his palms truly were as accurate as he hoped they were. What did they do to him? Flicking another page to go over the next one, his eyes roamed around the paper with ever-increasing agitation. This truly was serious, a lot more serious than something he would have hoped or truly even expected a matter like this to be. But things in the shinobi world never went as he expected them to, ever. It annoyed him a lot, but it was just how he was. He was the living, breathing example of something that the Kage of another village had hoped for: his death. Instead, it had led to his own untimely demise. Quite the irony if he did say so himself. But that reckless fool, he muttered in irritation. This boy is truly going to be the death of me, one way or the other. Giving him a soft smile upon hearing that, Mito stayed silent to let the man conjure up his thoughts. Eyes roaming across the file's papers expertly, he took in each and every damn word as carefully as he possibly could. What did they do to him? Once more he asked, this time flicking the report file to an abrupt close. Mito had the decency for reaching out her hand to take back the file she had retrieved with many hook and sinkers. Not that Tobarama was having any of it. Not even in the blink of an eye. The file was lit alight and burnt to a crisp in his palm before the ashes were thrown into the dustbin with a well-timed wind technique to follow it up and clean his ash-ridden hand at the same time. He did quite enjoy the knitting of her eyebrows in slight irritation. It especially annoyed Mito since it had been quite a chore to get one specific file out of those heavily guarded archives. Not to mention how many there truly were, dumped in that godforsaken warehouse of boring old reports. He didn't have to burn it, that was rude, especially since she hadn't quite read it thoroughly enough. Oh well, nothing. The slight upward inclination of his eyebrow and the suspicious look he was casting at her did show her that he didn't quite believe her. Really? They haven't done anything? She pressed on, and it surprised him. It wasn't like them. If his assumptions were right, they should have done anything to claw off. Yet. She finished her sentence and realization washed over his pale skin. Ah! Now that answered that. So when are they planning to do something, if I might ask? In an hour or so. Her simple answer troubled him to no ends. The sands of time were working against him, and each second was precious right now. As soon as the words had flown off her lips, Mito had to catch the man's hands in her own to stop him from ripping out every damn needle poked into his bed-ridden body. What the hell are you doing? She hissed. I have to attend the meeting. His voice was stern. He absolutely wasn't willing to let this catastrophe take place. If there was one thing that Tobarama knew was absolute, it was to never push Naruto into a corner that he could not escape without a fight. And when the boy was serious, which is rare as it was in and of itself regardless, when he was, the whole damn situation became serious. The boy scared even him when he fought back out of a situation that most would find inescapable and let his calm demeanor drop completely. He had learned it the hard way, in fact, to never push him into a corner. The humongous scar on his chest was still a painful reminder of the sleeping beast that slept within the confines of that adorable boy he had nurtured with his own two hands. No, you don't. Mito's words broke him off his thoughts. You are in no condition to leave this bed, not until I say so. Seeing her stubborn voice and firm eyes, Tobarama knew she wouldn't budge. Curse those damned Uzumaki genes of hers. But she had to know her place. This was one time he wouldn't cave in to her demands, even if he had to force his way out of this room. This was one thing he wasn't going to let slide. The consequences of this volatile meeting would be nothing short of a disaster when he'd look past on it in the near future if and when it occurred. Which it won't if he had anything to say about it. Mito, you don't understand the situation at hand. He pleaded to her, actually pleaded. If it surprised the redhead, she didn't show it. I understand it quite well. A firm hand clasped her wrist in a painful grip. Even after all her years training as a kunoichi, Mito had no choice but to wince ever so slightly in pain. Seeing her in so much pain, Tobarama let her wrist free, albeit with slight reluctance. Mito scooted even closer to his side when he ran a hand through his shaggy hair. Now that she saw him closely, the man was sweating, in an air-conditioned room no less. Tobarama, putting extra work to make her voice as soft as possible. She rubbed his cheek tenderly while cupping it in her palm. "What aren't you telling me?" Finally asking the million Rio question. She had to force him to look into her eyes when he started averting her gaze, as if she were the reincarnation of Medusa the Gorgon. "Tell me." Seeing him faltering, she knew one more gentle nudge would do it. "Please." That made him look at her deep violet eyes, and with a tired sigh his forehead fell onto her shoulder lifelessly. Running her fingers through his shaggy hair, Mito gave him some time to collect himself before he told her everything. She could get anything out of him if she willed it so, but never before had she pressed him on a matter he didn't want to divulge of his own accord. Everyone had their secrets, some more so than the others, but this was different. This was directly linked to one of her children. And so, she wasn't reluctant to milk it out of him, even if she had to drug him to make him speak his mind freely and truthfully. Mito, Naruto has a high tolerance to deal with things thrown against him, more so than anyone I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. Mito knew that, which other boy went through the daily abuse that he did without ever even glancing at someone the wrong way. "But there are boundaries," he said, and it snapped her attention to him. He is still a small boy, Mito. No matter how calm and peaceful he may appear on the outside, on the inside, he is always at turmoil. She didn't show it, but she truly was shocked. Letting her fingernails scratch his scalp soothingly, she let him pour out all that he was hiding from her. But one question remained nagging her. How had she not seen it? The boy truly had done a marvelous job to hide these things from her, if what Tobarama was saying was, in fact, actually true. "Trust me on this one, Mito." The woman did pay full attention to him. "If I've learned one thing over the years I've seen him grow, it's to never push Naruto to where he doesn't want to go. He takes after his grandfather way too much in those regards." Her whole body stiffened hearing that. The ghost of the Uchiha was as much of a menace on the battlefield as he was off of it. There were tales pertaining to the legendary shinobi where he had outright snapped people's necks if someone were to push him over the edge on his evening strolls. And unlike Naruto, who had a really high boiling point if she had never seen him go over the edge, Madara had been much more volatile. It did ease her worries a bit, worries that shouldn't have been there in the first place. But still, "Surely you're over-exaggerating, Tobarama," she said, a small hesitant laugh escaping her lips involuntarily. "I mean, how can my adorable little thing be so dash?" she said, before stopping abruptly, seeing his eyes looking at her furiously. Tobarama, due to his ever-stoic nature, didn't show it, but he was seething on the inside. To think she was taking this as a joke. The woman actually had the gall to laugh at his warning. "You think of this as some sort of joke?" he hissed. She blinked, hearing him so angry. Mito clearly hadn't meant it. Not that Tobarama was in any mood for her excuses. "Remember this?" Slapping her hand over his chest, rubbing it forcefully over a spot where she could feel the uneven bulges. Mito nodded. She did remember that. It was one of Tobarama's worst injuries to date. She herself had treated approximately 5 years ago. Not even his last battle scars were anything to the condition he had walked in that day. The Uzumaki heiress had almost suffered cardiac arrest seeing the ever-strong Tobarama, scorched like a burnt coal, walking in her house, bleeding to death. The man had a gaping hole scissoring right through his left lung. But that had been merely a training accident from what she remembered, a new forbidden technique that had backfired. What did it have to do with? "This was my mark from Naruto." His words cut her heart like a knife, splitting it in two. Violet eyes turning wide, she jarred at him in shock. That can't be." Whispering more so to herself, her mind couldn't fathom it. He was only 8 then, and even if he could, Naruto would never attack you. That? Interrupting her in half, in a moment of surprise, Tobarama laughed. "Is where you're wrong, Mito." He chuckled. Seeing her in such a mess state, he couldn't help but laugh. Laughing at her misery. Had he fallen so low? But seeing the ever-regal and uncaring heiress so bewildered, it just wasn't possible to stay calm. "There is only one." Mito's eyes followed his finger swinging. Each stroke it made left and right in a scolding manner made her heart race. "One person in this whole world who Naruto won't attack, even if she pushes him way too far. He just won't, that is his limit." he told her in a knowing tone. Everything clicked in Mito's mind. She could guess who it was. She knew the boy like the back of her hand. There was only one person who Naruto looked at with such adoration that it almost made her almost envy it. If only ever so slightly. Tsunade. His finger poked her nose with an informed nod, and she sat. Just sat. The grandmother of two still couldn't fathom his words from prior. Naruto would never raise a hand against her? Or would he? But why her? Her question wasn't lost to Tobarama. He knew she'd ask that. He loves me. Hell, he loves you. There's just no way. She argued fiercely. The way she said it did appall him a bit. Not the referral to Tsunade part. But the hell he loves you part. What the hell was he? Unlovable or something? Surely not. As if, maybe, seeing her eyes looking at him for an answer, he shook his head off idle thoughts. This isn't the time for that, Mito, he said. Realization washed over her face like glacial waters, her stomach coiling like a snake. The meeting, throwing his comforters aside. That's why I have to go, he urged. She cut him off with a snarl. No, absolutely not, Mito hissed. Her shout did surprise him. Hadn't he made his point clear enough? I'll go, she told him. Raising a slender eyebrow, he hummed in thought. What she said did have merit. The woman did know how to manipulate people if she could manipulate even him. Are you sure you'll handle it efficiently? He asked, looking at him as if he had somehow scandalized her. Mito's eyebrows knitted together in utter irritation. Who the hell do you think you're talking to? Raising his hands up in defeat, he knew he had crossed an unspoken boundary. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I was the one who fine-tuned you in the art of diplomatic affairs, Tobarama. You better learn your place. Her finger tapped his forehead intimidatingly before the woman was up and about to head over to the meeting chambers. Tobarama sat in silence. There was absolutely nothing to say. She could handle it. Ripping off the needles from his arms and chest, he stood up to put on a casual shirt. It didn't mean he shouldn't see the show after all. Being safer than sorry was always the way to go. And it would certainly be amusing to say the least. Meanwhile, Hatake households. I've heard of the accomplishment you and your team achieved during your last mission. The voice of the speaker was gruff, almost to the point of sounding strict, as if he was born with it. The man who had said it, in question, was a diligently tall man, his body buff enough to make most, if not all men, a bit nervous just by standing in the cover of his shadow. Eyes a rare shade of brown, lacking so much as a hint of emotion in their recesses, drilled into the person he had currently engaged in a conversation. A conversation that one could dare argue for a confrontation. But it was just an opinion, nothing concrete. Yes, father. The polite response was dutiful, sounding almost strained and forced to anyone else but the man whom it had been addressed to. Your teammate ran in to help while you stayed behind. Correct me if I am wrong, he asked, and once more there wasn't any warmth in the man's voice, or any sense of doubt for that matter. Clearly he knew that he wasn't wrong. It was just an intimidation tactic being imposed on the opposing party he was conversing with to get his point across. No, you're right, father. As brief and curt as he could be, Tsukumo inclined his head down as a sign of respect. The man in front of him, recognized now as his father, crossed his arms over his chest while silence mulled over the darkly lit room for a few tense moments. The candles around the room, the only current source of light in these barely lit chambers, flickered each passing second while the large man's eyes almost tried to burn a hole down the boy sitting formally on his knees, right in front of him. A small, almost non-existent twitch of the lips flashed on the man's lips, the man being Masamoto Hatake, the tranquil assassin of the Leaf and the current head of the Hatake family. Putting his large hand on top of Tsukumo's head, he playfully ruffled his child's hair in a rare but pleasant show of emotion. Tsukumo himself sat surprised at the sudden change of mood in his father's heart. Not that he was complaining. He felt like he was almost going to burst out a joyful smile when he heard the next words that came out of his father's mouth. I'm proud of you. It was the first time his father had praised him, and Tsukumo couldn't help but look down to hide the embarrassed smile that broke out on his face. Giving a meek nod, he rubbed his legs together in nervousness. This was definitely new, but he liked this a lot. You remembered everything I taught you. Masamoto continued on his praise. Never engage an opponent of whom you know nothing about, and never fight any opponent you know you can't defeat. Those are the laws I trained you with. It didn't sound like praise to anyone, but for Tsukumo, who had rarely ever heard his father speak more than a sentence than what was absolutely necessary, it meant the world to him. Live by these rules, my son. For the way of the assassin is to blend in the shadows until you know that your opponent is dead even before you make a move. Determination flashed in Tsukumo's eyes, and he nodded joyfully. Hi! Pulling back his hand, Masamoto crossed his arms again and delved deep into thought. There was still one thing that was bothering him, a little too much for his liking. Your teammate. Looking up, Tsukumo tilted his head in confusion. Naruto Uchiha. He was the one who rushed in, correct? Giving a timid nod, Tsukumo squirmed slightly when his father narrowed his eyes on him. The piercing gaze was as intimidating to him as was a tiger's for his fallen praise. Stay away from him. He's trouble. Tsukumo almost spoke up to protest on instincts alone, but his father raised his hand to shut him up with a subtle shake of his head. He's reckless. Tsukumo bit his lip nervously. His father was right. Naruto was indeed reckless when it came to making tough decisions. His kind, the kind who live and breathe through the moment like mavericks die an early death thinking they can take on the world on ideals alone. I don't want him influencing you to do something reckless and bringing shame to me. His reputation already isn't the best and his actions don't help it any. I've spoken, Tsukumo, you will abide. Tsukumo nodded half-heartedly. However reckless he may be, Naruto was still his trusted comrade. But more so than that, he was his rival, he was a friend, his best friend. Seeing his face not holding the firmness that it should in his nod, Masamoto decided to emphasize his point a bit more. You will stay away from him. Am I clear? He commanded. The way he had said it left no room for arguments. His father had never liked Naruto in the first place, but had never invaded his personal life, seeing he was progressing as per the man's expectations each day, every day. But today was an exception. Yes, father. Tsukumo answered in defeat. Looking for any signs of lies, Masamoto gauged his son for a minute with critical eyes, but upon finding nothing but truth in his words, he nodded curtly. Good. Now it's time for your training. Go and train with your sword. I'll be with you shortly, he said. Getting up, Masamoto left the room without even so much as glancing back at his son. Tsukumo sat there, his eyes as troubled as they could be. But right before leaving, Masamoto decided to speak from the other side of the door. Friends are hindrances to a shinobi, Tsukumo. Remember that. Do not get attached. Friends will betray you when it truly matters, and you must be ready to betray them too if need be. Emotions will make you hesitant. Remember, the only things that matter in an assassin's life are objectives and survival. Tsukumo clenched his fists tightly, flashes of memories from his last mission and all the time he had spent with his friends brimming up in his mind. Turning around and leveling a glare. What truly matters, Tsukumo? Tell me, asked Masamoto. The question came in a strict voice that absolutely demanded an answer, and not too keen on incurring his father's wrath, Tsukumo answered as diligently as he possibly could. Objectives and survival, father. Everything else is just a hindrance to our way of the shinobi. He answered dutifully. Watching his father's shadow walk away from the door, Tsukumo sat back down with a tired plop. He didn't feel like training too much today, to be honest. Hokage Tower, Council Chambers, Naruto Uchiha is here as per his appointment. The sudden announcement caused all work around the U-shaped table to halt temporarily. All eyes turned up to the Chunin who had been the cause of said interruption in the first place. And he was getting quite nervous seeing all these councilmen stare at him so coldly. He gulped for a second to calm his nerves down. I send him in? His voice came out much more meeker than thought possible, and got a stiff nod from them all. Sighing in relief, he scurried away from the deadly silent room like a panic-stricken hare. He, for one, definitely didn't want to be in front of them right now. The whole council sat silent as a rock, each of them pondering over the same damn thing at the same damn time. All except one. Quite frankly, most, if not all of them, were looking forward to this day. A chance to corner the outcast in their web of words, poke all his buttons and enact severe punishment over him with no fears of impending doom from anyone above their pay grade. They were the power in the village right now, to pass on such a golden chance that had presented itself to them on a metaphorical silver platter certainly wasn't in the works. Everything was in their favor, well, everything except one thing. Stifling a soft yawn in her palm, Mito tucked a small lock of hair behind her ear. Crossing her slender thigh over the other, she placed her elbow on the table and used her free palm to plop down her cheek on it. Her eyes remained locked on the open doors to the chambers in slight anticipation. She was bored beyond belief. Her presence had been a surprise. Not even the most thoughtful of them had guessed that she of all people would be the first one to show herself here this fine morning. But she had, and that caused a plethora of problems for every single one of them. No one was foolish enough to think she was here to indulge herself in the pleasure they all were blessed with. A pleasure the World Dictionary called paperwork. No, certainly not. She was here just for this moment. And every fucking one of them knew that. It was no secret to the villagers that she was close to the boy. She had never officially taken him on as an apprentice or anything close of that sort, but the close relationship the village pariah and the First Lady of the Leaf shared was known by one and all within the walls of this village. But her presence alone made this situation much more complicated than the simple one-sided cornering assembly they had wordlessly planned on holding their charge with beforehand. The main problem being the woman herself. She was a master in political matters, her expertise going so far as to her being the primary advisor to both the Hokages in dire times. And her reputation didn't just stop there. Everyone, them included, respected her quite highly, not only due to her heritage and noble blood, well, that was a major part nonetheless, but not the sole reason. Her accomplishments could be regarded as one of the most any shinobi had ever achieved in pushing the newly budding major village to thrive towards even greater heights of prosperity. Her sealing skill being the first. She was the top-tier seal master they currently possessed. Tobarama Senju, the Hokage, for crying out loud, did not hold so much as a candle to her if it came down to the small yet revered arts that were the seals. She had been the primary hand, the first one who had devised that the village needed protection which seals could establish like no other means could ever hope to achieve. Designing, constructing, even so far as to putting the finishing touches on the barrier, the same one that they still used, was done under the critical eyes of this woman herself. Even now, after so many decades of it being functional, no one had found a point that could be called its weakness. And more so, there were still many times she was consulted when it came time for maintenance of the main array of the great matrix they used. Its primary matrix was still so intricate that many seal masters of their own village had failed to even comprehend the basic and smaller segments of the barrier, let alone tinker with the primary matrix that held it all together. The sealing core of the village looked up to her as a goddess of sorts, even when she didn't so much as visit them until it was absolutely necessary. She wasn't revered as the sealing mistress in the bingo books for no reason, after all. That wasn't to say she was the unofficial heiress to the entire fortunes lying within the land of whirlpools and had inherited the family fortunes after the death of her husband as his direct nominee, the rights granted to her by her being his legal wife. Shinobi rules were quite different for nominees, since so many shinobi never married, instead pertained to being faithful to a single lover but never being tied down in holy matrimony so as to avoid their enemies targeting their families out from their eyes. Thus, most of the times the village leader decided whether to declare it down to the nominee or their spouse, absolve it into the village's treasury, or part it two ways and give the split parts to both sides according to the percentages the Kage deems it to be right for the welfare of the entire village as a whole. These rules were null and void if the demised soul had left a will behind him before his death, and then only the rules laid down by him were officially acceptable, and nothing else. These laws were concretely laid down by Tobarama himself to avoid internal clan conflicts of the numerous clans that were quite prominent before the formation of the organization that the world now looked up to as the Hidden Leaf. He had laid down that fear to rest altogether by taking matters into his own hands, and the law had been passed and accepted by each clan equally as a sign of trust they were handing over to their new leader, all done back in the early years of Konoha. That brought us back to the point that even though she was only acting as a diplomatic clan head in the council, Mito's power and influence in these chambers was still immense. And with Tobarama out of the picture, she was the substitute clan head for the Senju clan as well. She could rumble up whole nations with just a simple signature if she so needed to, with just a small flick of some ink and paper, and that in itself did not bode well for anyone who dared cross her. Or anyone she cared about, that is, but they still had the upper hand here. For Naruto was the one who had placed himself under heavy scrutiny by rushing out of mission parameters and making rash decisions by himself. He would be punished, that was for sure. But to what extent, only time would tell. Though it would be quite lenient than what they had planned, that fact was intangible. The silent tension was broken like a pinprick when the doors to the sacred chambers screeched themselves ajar. The long shadow of today's guest of honor shortened in as the crown of golden and orbs of blue finally flickered to light, and just to melt her heart, seeing the most beloved lady of his life seating oh so gracefully in her chair. Naruto gave her a charming smile that was mirrored adoringly on her own lips. Konoha no Sado, Hokage Tower, Council Chambers, standing at the anterior to all troubles of his life. Naruto all but ignored the icy stares being leveled on him. He was used to them by now anyways, and focused all his attention on gazing at the red-headed woman seated in front of him. Their intense stare-down lasted a moment too long, azure eyes boring into those deep pools of amethyst with an adoration only a child gazing at his mother could ever hope for. Blinking numbly, both snapped their necks aside to see all councilmen looking at Mito expectantly. She did have the decency to flush in embarrassment and reciprocate her child's polite nod with one of her own. That was all they saw before her loving visage all but vanished, leaving behind only a stoic countenance that betrayed not a single emotion inside her heart. Naruto-san, greeted a new voice, nodding, and Sui-san. Naruto greeted back, centering all his attention over the man. Naruto stared at the Nara clan head with an unwitting look, a look that screamed innocence. Being the smartest of the bunch, and Sui inwardly gave props to the boy for holding himself in a manner that would have suited a trial before, and all this was even before knowing what he was called here for in the first place. He was already pleading innocence, smart little child that, sighing lazily, "We have received some troubling reports from your squad," the man started. Nodding once more, Naruto had a fair idea as to where this was heading. "Then am I wrong in assuming that this troubling matter has something specifically to do with my actions, seeing none of my squad mates are present here?" he asked. "Quite an astute statement you gave there, I must say. Regardless, you are on point," commended Ensui. "To be blunt," started Akio Inuzuka, effectively cutting off Ensui's interjection in half. Naruto's slender eyebrow shot upwards, seeing a displeased scowl flash on the Nara's face before it was quickly hidden. All done in a split second. Some other person might have missed it, but his clan wasn't known as the sharpest of eyes in the elemental nations for nothing. But deciding not to dwell too much on it, he kept it in the back of his mind for now. "Many, if not all of us, believe your actions to be unbecoming of a ninja who wears the leaf headband," he reasoned diplomatically, though the underlying threat wasn't lost at all to the blonde boy, who had half expected it actually. Inhaling a deep breath, "I see," Naruto rebutted. "Whatever it is you say." Akio blinked as the blonde's words struck him. "Wait, what?" he bespoke, clearly not understanding Naruto's humble stance. Blue eyes took in everything in front of him with a sincere look. "This was no trial, it was an enforcement. It doesn't matter what I say at the end of this trial, does it?" Naruto retorted icily, catching those unintended flinches all across the room with his frigid blues. "So let's end this farce of a trial and hear it. Let's save ourselves the time," he finished mirthfully. That was all he could say before the entire room erupted in a rage-induced shout fest. Curses and obscenities were flung his way with no shame or regard for appearances whatsoever. Naruto, disregarding each and every one of those shinobi, if they could even be called that after having been benched for half their lives in this dank-looking room, focused his eyes on the only person that currently intrigued him. Mito had her face hidden in her hands out of sheer trite, and for a moment, just for a moment, he felt guilty for putting her through all this. But frankly, by this point, he was beyond done with these coots of the council. To think they had taken his elated and jubilant demeanor and managed to turn it upside down in a few minutes. He had to give them props, but that was all he had to give. There would certainly be no politeness, at least not from him. Breaking his gaze away from the crown of crimson, his slant eyebrow raised in utter amusement seeing them shouting and reaching out of their tables to catch a hold of him. It was quite comical, so he did the only thing he could. He laughed, loudly and shamelessly. That was, quite frankly, the wrong thing to do given the sound levels increased twofold after that. But Naruto being Naruto just couldn't help it. He clutched his stomach and rolled over in mirthful pain. It was beyond hysterical. That is enough. His laughs and their shouts ceasing, Naruto was quite interested at seeing the seething Inuzuka clan head who looked ready to, quite literally, murder him. How dare you mock us? He roared. Do you have any idea what we can do to you, you accursed child? Fangs bared. His nails scraped the timber of his table like a beast. Splinters rose, and any lesser genin might have been intimidated. But Naruto was far from being normal. Like what? He mocked, further enticing the riled-up man. Cut my pay from the previous mission, or from the next one too? He snarled right back. Silence. Jaws dropped all across the floor. A pin could have pricked the thick tension settled between the two men on the floor. Mito, beyond shocked, could do no more than stare numbly at the completely different visage of the boy she held as her heart for dear life. Never was he the one for initiating violence, and even from here she could tell he was doing all this just from being tired, smirking upon seeing his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Cat caught your tongue, mutt? He taunted a little more. That sealed her worries. He wasn't thinking straight. Tired was he from their stereotypes, sneaky whispers, and double plays. Akio, though, was beyond angry. To think a mere genin was talking back to him, even more blasphemous, he was successfully mocking him. Man, he's as troublesome as the rest of them. The Uchiha, I mean. You are of their blood descent, all right. And Sui commented tiredly. Akio stared dumbly, appalled at his colleague's words. And Sui, what dash, he debated heatedly. But that was all he could say before. What's that supposed to mean? It was almost a hiss. The low whisper could have melted ice with its intensity. And Sui gave the young lad a pitying look, seeing his unbridled hostility. It was only natural after all. Relax, kid. Not all of us are trying to pick a bone with you. Ignoring the mock gasp of the Inuzuka clan head at Ensui's crafty side tone for his colleague and his smart little pun on bones, he continued on, though I am curious. Why do you keep us in such low regards? He asked, honestly curious. From what he had gathered on the boy through word of mouth, he was actually painfully polite to everyone, even to his enemies. But to them, he had been anything but polite. Instead, he looked ready to bite back, if need be. You disgust me, silencing the table from another uproar, and Sui waved his hand as a motion for him to go on. He could see the boy wasn't done yet. Every damn one of you have the power to do something, to change something. Tio, I don't know, make a difference. Naruto whispered, his features suddenly downtrodden. A spark of hope flashed in the Nara's eyes. But all you guys do is sit behind that damn table, mouth your hearts out and take notes for all the shit you pull on either the clients or your own subordinate charges. That is why I loathe the very being of diplomatic ninjas like you. Ninjas who have the peace of mind akin to that of cattle. He answered blithely, and Sui opened his mouth to interject. But Naruto was far from done. To me, you have less worth than livestock. And with that statement, Sui clamped his lips shut. Seeing the boy eye all of them in utter disdain, and knowing how heartfelt, how stubborn the members of his clan were, he knew words won't change that mindset. Not easily, at least, deciding to take a peaceful approach. Those are some rather harsh words. You must have seen something truly disastrous to have come to think of us at such a low degree, no? He asked in a vain attempt to steer the conversation to a bit more peaceful side. Not like Naruto was having any of it. Just go and look at the back alleys of our bustling streets. Times of peace may have blinded your senses. Mine are still intact. Orphanages are overflowing with children lucky enough to make it there. Rest live in starvation or under whatever roof their parents may have left them, while the rest die on streets. I've seen them all, so don't bother interjecting. War orphans, whose parents died protecting our oh-so-honorable walls. All they got was a name scribbled down on some stupid stone, while you and your children. He pointed a finger at the rather lavish-looking dessert and tea at each of their desks. It was self-explanatory, honestly. Right now, you all have supreme power over all our authorities, but you get the gist. Naruto finished nonchalantly. I see. Silence befell the two, both eyeing each other in a new-found light. And Sui clearly hadn't thought for a boy of 13 to be so deeply ingrained into his psyche. while Naruto's eyes shone with respect for his debater on a completely different reason. He was the first to have clearly listened to all his accusations while need not bothering to argue with them. Instead, his eyes looked to be calculating something. He respected a man of reason. Mito coughed. The tension broke, both men tearing their gazes away to see Mito staring at Naruto with a sad face. Naruto looked away in shame, not able to hold her eyes for even a second. Maybe he had spoken a bit too much. For the matter of your punishment, argued another councilman, you must pay reparations to the village for putting your comrades in the way of harm, possibly even death, he stated dryly. Scratch that, his words were right on point. Naruto would have argued that a shinobi always held their lives at stake whenever they took on a mission, be it any rank or difficulty, but decided otherwise. It was pointless. How do you expect me to pay for anything? He asked, eyeing him as if he were stupid. In case you've forgotten, let me remind you that I live on whatever little chump change I make from my missions while you keep cutting down my pays here and there for whatever reasons. Most of them had to bite back a wince at that venomous reply. I am an orphan myself who doesn't own anything of value other than dash. Realization washed on Naruto's face. Dread coiled in his heart like a snake. Smirking evilly, your properties. You are a legal adult, remember? Akio bit off midway through his talk. Naruto was done talking anyways. It was time for making a stand. Eyes narrowing dangerously thin. Come again? Naruto asked. No, dared him to answer. I said your house. That property may suffice as payment to the village. Mito shuddered. An aura of indifference settled around the blonde. To make matters worse, she had seen that look before, decades ago. In that man's eyes. The look that was 10 times worse than anyone's pure killing intent. It was an intent of intimidation. She hadn't seen that look for a long time, but now that her memory had been refreshed, it was still as worst as she remembered it to be. Looking aside, she couldn't help but pity those frozen fools who had pushed him to go that far. Knowing not how he knew of that skill, she thinned her lips when Naruto started taking simple steps to the Inuzuka clan head. Her fingers flicked in a small little slip of paper in her palms. If push came to shove, she would stop him before his instincts dug him an even deeper hole than he already had pushed himself in. Each step felt like a year for the man being approached. It felt as if the apparition of that demon was walking down to him. Pupils dilating, he sat back in his chair as his knees gave way and soundlessly watched the young boy approach him. Naruto stopped at his desk and soundlessly placed his palms on the table. Leaning his lips closer to the ear, "Mutt," he whispered out of everyone's earshot. Akio gulped thickly. Sweat trickled down his nose and a droplet converged on its tip. The tension in the room was almost palpable, and to make matters worse, Naruto's hot breath was tickling his ears like steam. Do you know why the Uchiha clan is known by all? He asked again, coiling his finger around the tooth necklace the man had worn around his neck. Naruto smirked, seeing his fearful eyes, an act that caused the man's stiff body to innately begin hyperventilation. And feared by all? He spoke quietly. Enough! Blinking out of his daze, Naruto looked aside to see the source of that annoying interruption, only to repulse in fright at the furious glare being leveled at him, courtesy of those renowned amethyst orbs. Come here, commanded Mito. Like a kicked puppy of sorts, Naruto walked towards her table with a bowed head. Mito stood stiffly, her hip cocked aside while her arms were crossed beneath her ample bosoms. Her eyes shone with a nervousness she hadn't felt in a long time now. I wasn't expecting that, she murmured quietly. I know. Appreciating his apologetic stance, Mito cupped his cheek and placed a tight kiss on his forehead. Much too tight for being comforting. Go home, she whispered and subtly slid in a small little object in his hip pouch out of anyone's notice. No one even dared to argue her decision. Many even breathed in relief at that. Demons, the lot of them, stammered a shaken Inuzuka. He tried to muster up a glare with all the remaining ego he had as an alpha male. But in the end, he couldn't match Naruto's slitted, side-eyed look he was leveled with while the boy in question walked out of the chambers with the ferocity of a prowling tiger. In that moment, Akio realized he wasn't the only alpha around here. No one heard the soundless footsteps of impending doom close in from behind them. Stoic amber eyes watched the small Uchiha crest on Naruto's jacket with a withering look while the gears in his mind turned. Running a hand through his shaggy white hair, it was high time the council was reminded who the top dog was around here. I see my absence has made this place a lot more entertaining, no? Tobarama Senju had a class of buffoons to teach and preach he will. KONOHA no Sado, shopping districts, trudging along. Naruto's crimson eyes memorized each and every word of the scroll Mito had slipped into his hip pouch ever so subtly. It was quite disheartening for him to digest that she could still get one over him without so much as trying. But it was how it was. Though the last thing he had expected from her was this, a mission. Naruto, sighing, he rolled up the scroll and slid it back into his pocket. His ears could discern that voice in unconsciousness. It was just that recognizable. He turned around and sure enough, a crown of sandy gold hair toppled down to a dusty stop by his side. You left me at home, pouted Tsunade, shrugging helplessly. You were sleeping, he argued, frowning and puffing her cheeks up. Well, you could have woken me up, she retorted right back. Both walked along the streets in silence after that, taking their time to enjoy the serenity that came with these early morning strolls. Well, only Naruto looked to be calm since Tsunade was hopping on her heels with an overflowing energy from the nice sleep she got last night. You got the scroll too, I guess, she mumbled awkwardly, surprised. Yeah, I did. He nodded, eyeing him curiously. Tsunade held her hands behind her hips and whistled ever so innocently. So, she drawled dramatically. We're going together, I guess. Why is this? Cheered Tsunade, pumping her fist high in the air, flushing in embarrassment when she saw people, Naruto included, eyeing her in amusement. She pulled it back. What? She snapped at him. Everyone went back to their businesses while biting back a chuckle. Nothing. Naruto shook his head and placed a poke on her forehead. She shot him a dirty look, clearly not pleased how he was making fun of her happiness. It wasn't every day she went on a mission with him, after all. Whatever. She huffed and looked away. Her body started squirming when a finger started ticklishly poking her waist. Are you sulking or something? Asked Naruto. No, whined Tsunade and slapped his hand aside. And stop doing that. Doing what? That. Huh. Groaning. Uff. You're impossible, you know that, right? She whined. Naruto eyed her innocently and took a page from his dear friend's tricks. You say something, Tsunade? He asked, feigning all the innocence in the world. She bristled in anger and started the mantra of clenching and unclenching her fists. It wouldn't be nice if she punched him through a wall. Well, maybe it would. Inhaling a sharp, calming breath. I'm hungry, she mumbled childishly. Smiling, Naruto tucked a stray lock behind her ear. Dumplings? He asked. Tsunade herself mirrored his smile, realizing the true intent behind his words. Her anger lay all but forgotten. Never did they eat dumplings whenever he asked her that. She hated dumplings with a passion. It was just a code word for them to take something to eat and go hide in the middle of nowhere for an all-day picnic whenever one of them was feeling down for some reason. It was a little code of sorts. Moreover, she could see the lingering trouble twinkling in his eyes, so clasping his hand in her own. Dumplings it is! She grinned and started pulling him ahead with a laugh. Whisking their way through the busy streets, both blondes were grinning like idiots. Their laughs could have lit entire cities for weeks. KONOHA no Sado, village outskirts, munching on her snack, her tingling taste buds eliciting involuntary squeals of delight every now and then. What's eating up on you? She asked distractedly. Nothing, snapping out of her food-induced coma. She looked at the barely touched meatloaf in his hands with a worried gaze, idly cupping his cheek to force his gaze on her. Tell me. She added a little tenderness in her voice, eyeing her with troubled eyes. Naruto deliberated in his mind on what not to tell her. Don't you trust me? Blinking. Of course I do, he retorted instantly. Don't be stupid, he said in a matter-of-fact tone. Then tell me. Worries melting, he draped his arms around her neck like a gorilla of sorts and pushed all his weight onto her. Oi! Be careful, you idiot, she chastised him hesitantly. The wind blowing from beneath her feet did anything but let her goosebumps melt down. Let her be the judge that no matter how great a shinobi you were, sitting dangling-legged on the edge of a ravine was awfully terrifying. It was a fact, though the surplus weight draping all over her toppled her down on her back. Naruto now pressed flushed against her front. She didn't mind it one bit, to be honest. It was the meeting, wasn't it? She muttered. His drawled exhale on her neck was more than enough to answer her question. She sighed, clicking her teeth in annoyance. Idiots, the lot of them, I tell you, she murmured. Naruto chuckled at her blunt and harsh tongue. You are such a mouthful, Tsunade, he said jokingly, brushing away the humor. They don't know you, Naruto, she whispered, hoisting his body up on his elbows, each resting either side of her waist. Naruto tilted his head aside. And you do? He asked, honestly curious, giggling adorably. Of course I do, she chortled. I know you better than anyone, idiot, she stated, pride evident in her voice. Naruto huffed, acting hurt from her words, and rolled over on his back. As if, he taunted, whatever he had expected. He certainly hadn't expected her to roll over him, so she was using his stomach as a seating cushion. His eyebrow tipped upward, seeing her intense glare. I do, she said, steel edging her voice. He knew she did, sighing in defeat. Yeah, I guess you do. That earned him a flash of one of her brilliant smiles. Lying her chin down on his chest, she started paddling her legs back and forth like a duck. You excited about the next mission? She questioned gleefully. Humming in thought, I guess. He muttered. His sneaky comment earned him a soft slap to the nose. Don't be such a wise ass. You'll love it, the island's really cool, you know. She squealed. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. You've been there once, haven't you? Yup, shrugging. Meh, I like the lands better. Oceans aren't my thing, I guess. He stated offhandedly, pouting. It'll be like a trip. We'll go swimming and gambling and all that good stuff. She grinned cheekily and tried to persuade him, poking the tip of her nose pointedly. Nana, it's a mission, not a field trip, he reminded her wisely. She slapped his finger away with a frown. Oh, come on. What's wrong with living a little every now and then? He had nothing to argue against that. Leave it to Tsunade to turn a serious mission into a field trip of sorts. She was the epitome of distractions when it came to entertaining herself with something. Then there was the matter of the remaining time they had. Wanna laze around? Snuggling her face into his neck, Naruto wordlessly wrapped his arms around her waist and let himself become her mattress for the remainder of the day. Needless to say, by the time it was dusk, his back would be sore as hell. Next morning, Hokage Tower, council chambers, walking in, hands tucked in pockets and a slothful expression gracing his face, Naruto trudged into the chambers in a lazy stride. Disregarding the icy stares being leveled over him, he yawned, which for some reason made their glares turn murderous. What had he done to offend them so much this early in the morning? Surely nothing much. Scratching his head while shaking off the cobwebs in his head, he looked aside, only to blink in surprise at the twinkling black eyes staring back at him. Jiraiya, grinning like an idiot. Yo! The boy greeted back. Let me guess, you were summoned too? Naruto stated dryly, nodding sagely and crossing his arms underneath his chest. Yeah, they called both our teams, he replied. That answered that. The blonde had been petrified to hear the abrupt knocking on his front door at the break of dawn. Let's just say whenever he opened his door that early in the morning, bad things happened. Very bad things, youthfully bad things. But that had been hardly the case this time. It had been a messenger hawk pecking away at his door with a small message tied on its claw. Report to the mission's desk at the earliest, matter of urgent importance. It had read. So strapping on all his gear, slinging over his signature lacquer blade on his back and letting his little ball of fur snuggle on the back of his high-collared jacket. Here he was, early as all hell. To be frank, he felt quite stupid to be here so early. Not to mention his senses were still dulled due to being sleepy. He certainly wasn't a morning person, that was for sure. Hearing the oncoming footsteps, he side-glanced at the incoming party of ninjas with a disconcerted look, though he couldn't help but smile when an elbow nudged his waist gently. Morning? Whispered a chirpy-looking Tsunade, occupying his side like usual, nodding. Morning. He greeted equally quietly. May I have your attention, please? All eyes snapping to the front. Everyone eyed the weirdly dressed man with a withering look. Gray, waist-length hair tied in a neat ponytail and a pointed goatee on the tip of his chin. He was dressed head to toe in what Naruto recognized to be samurai armor. "This is Miffune," introduced the man in charge of today's mission's desk. No one even bothered to return a respectful nod, since the man seemed annoyed to be there more than anything else. Taking an authoritative step up front, Hiruzen decided to ask the question ringing through everyone's minds. "What might a samurai of your caliber be doing here, Miffune?" he questioned politely. The man could have responded curtly, Hiruzen wouldn't have minded. But doing the unthinkable, he scoffed and was clearly fond of the saying, "Silence is golden." "Hey, is it just me or do things seem to be a lot tenser than usual?" Everyone ignored Jiraiya's hushed whisper and paid attention up front. "We have to deliver a scroll back to Iron Country while escorting Miffune and his patronage there as well. Seeing the need for rush, you are the only 2 squads we currently have that are fresh and raring to go. Hiruzen Sarutobi will be commander for the remainder of this mission. Do both squads accept?" It wasn't a question. This was a mission being assigned. There was no room for argument. It was only a stupid front in front of the client. "Hi!" chipped all genin in unison. Hiruzen accepting a couple of scrolls from the Chunin and tucking them safely inside his pockets. "Let's go, we leave in 15. Was all Hiruzen said before he flickered into thin air in a volley of flames, Miffune in tow with him. Tsunade swirled away in a torrent of water, while Orochimaru was gone with a burst of wind. Due, eyeing Naruto awkwardly, was about to run away to the location before Naruto clasped his shoulder with a sigh and flickered away in a bolt of lightning. Tsukumo eyed the spot his blonde friend had occupied a moment ago longingly, the unsettling silence now eating away at him. There had been no pleasantries shared between the squad mates. Hell, not a single one of them had said hi to each other. At least the blonde had seen Dewey's nervousness and even gone so far as to acknowledge him. He himself had been completely disregarded, even though he had been standing so close to him no more than a few seconds ago. Why did he feel so far? The entire trip had been made in silence. Everyone walking quietly with trained eyes searching for an imaginary ambush each passing second. It almost seemed believable that they were wishing for an ambush to take place so that their minds would be taken off the unnerving quietness settled around them. Even Jiraiya, Due, and Tsunade, the most carefree trio of the party, were quiet as a cucumber, testament to the volatile atmosphere surrounding them. Things between samurais and shinobi had hardly been anything but friendly in the past, the former standing up for even the smallest of chores if it called on their honor as warriors, while shinobi were anything but honorable. They were only in it for the money or other forms of gains. Betrayals, backstabbing, and mutiny were hardly even surprises anymore for their creed. Differences made them seem night and day to each other. Needless to say, both parties held a hateful amount of resentment for the other. Miffune, leading his patronage, eyed the backs of the 2 genin walking in front of him with a hint of curiosity. More specifically, the bold symbols embossed on the back of their necks. "May I ask you something?" He broke the silence. Naruto hummed nonchalantly. "Shoot." He shrugged. "Why do your clans wear your clan symbols so openly?" he asked. "Aren't shinobi supposed to hide their clan names from any and all enemies? Or so I've heard." He questioned in a small attempt to make small talk and learn what made these dishonorable monsters tick. Surprisingly, it's a matter of pride. It was Tsunade who answered him. Flicking her ponytail left to right, she locked her hands behind her hips and smiled. "Since olden days, our clans have been unquestionably strong. Not hiding our identities was supposed to be a testament to the powers our clansmen possessed. The 4 noble clans are the only ones who did this at first, with many others trying to imitate us over time. Most of them forgot about it or just thought it to be too much work, but the noble clans stuck to their codes loyally." She answered in a knowing tone. "Really?" Miffune asked half-heartedly. "I never would have put words such as honor, loyalty, and nobility near the creed of you ninjas." His tone was demeaning, and the shameless snickering of his henchmen behind him was doing anything but riling up a volatile princess way too much for her liking. "You wouldn't be the first to make that mistake." Naruto chimed in before his female accomplice blew a gasket. "The Senju, the Uchiha, the Uzumaki, and the Hyuga aren't feared as the noble clans for no reason. Take my word for it." They are the best of allies and worst of opponents. Had it not been for his carefree tone and bored expression, it might have been deemed a threat. Let history be witness to all those who stood against them, be it enemy or ally. Not one has ever survived the wrath of the Honorable Four. He added wisely. Hiruzen stood silently in the back, relishing in observing what it was that had intrigued his father so much to take on this particular genin for his student. To make the man who hated teaching become a teacher. Miffune, though, caught the slight wavering in his words. Them, you say? He asked. You speak as if you're not one of them. He added his own 2 cents, eyeing him cautiously. Naruto hadn't expected him to look so deeply into his words, narrowing his eyes on the road ahead and glancing back at him with an unsettling smile. You read too much into it, he simply replied, effectively cutting their conversation to an abrupt halt. Hey! Jiraiya nudged Tsukumo's shoulder to gain his attention. Yeah? Asked Tsukumo. Is there something wrong with your team? Stiffening at that, Tsukumo eyed him suspiciously. Why would you say that? He inquired. I don't know. I mean, each one of you is trying to maintain their distance from the other. Even that guy with the freaky eyebrows is awfully silent. Sighing, Tsukumo shook his head wordlessly and motioned for him to drop it for now. This was hardly the place to discuss their internal matters and problems. Frowning, but knowing when not to be a prude, Jiraiya dropped the topic and went back to brooding at the unfair positions his sensei had assigned to them. He had wanted to take point with Tsunade no less, but no, it had to have been someone else. Naruto no less, being the sharpest eyes of the bunch and the best frontline fighter of the bunch. Hiruzen had deemed Naruto to be a better choice for guarding the front of their envoy along with Tsunade. Clearly, he had seen the hints of hostility between teammates of his father's squad, and found it wise to let them have their space to sort things out. Time was the best healer in cases like these. Tsunade had been anything but disappointed. Instead, she seemed elated, overjoyed even, something that annoyed Jiraiya to no ends. Jiraiya, keep your eyes on the road, chided a smooth voice. Ambush happens when you least expect it to, after all. Bristling in anger, said boy leveled a murderous glare at Orochimaru's smug-looking back. The teasing edge to his words wasn't lost to the white-haired boy, and he looked ready to pull the mane of his hair out with his bare hands. It was hardly his day. Ignoring the bickering going on behind his back, Naruto took in all the serenity of these unknown lands with the curiosity of a 5-year-old. West of the road were steep plateaus, providing them with natural shade from the overhead sun. Beige and rugged, they stood tall like watchtowers standing proud on their stony summits. To the east, the grounds were lower while getting deeper and deeper with each step until the land melded with the water flowing beneath the bridge, far in the distance. The bridge itself being the only way to cross the border between Fire Nation and Grass Country. As mesmerizing as the view around him was, it unnerved him to no end, an emotion reciprocated equally cautiously by Hiruzen, Tsukumo, and Orochimaru. This was the perfect spot for an ambush. To make things worse, everything was calm, way too calm. No hoots of baboons, zero chirps of birds. Each of them knew from experience what that meant. Eyes bleeding crimson, the black marks in his eyes swirled lazily in concentric circles, like a predator eyeing his prideful lands. His sinned eyes took in each little flicker of the leaves with vision rivaling that of a hawk. Out of everyone's eye shot, his little finger clasped Tsunade's in a soft clasp. Tilting her head aside, she eyed him curiously. His words were anything but what she had expected to hear. We are surrounded. Stiffening, her hands subtly dug into her hip pouch and gripped a kunai tightly. Gulping uneasily, she let the dreaded words slip past her lips. How many? Eyes darting around, Naruto signaled Hiruzen with a subtle nod that was reciprocated equally stiffly. Both of them knew. Too many. That was all he said before all hell broke loose. Harshly clasping Miffune's arm, Naruto vanished in a bolt of lightning, just in time to escape the deadly volley of metal stars that would have rained down on them a second later. Landing by his side, Tsunade expanded her senses and looked towards her sensei for orders. Split up, the man mouthed, unsheathing the sword slung on his waist. What's the meaning of this? Roared Miffune. looking at the corpses of some of his unlucky comrades with rage-filled eyes. Naruto would have facepalmed and made a sharp comment had it been any other day, any other time. Instead, "It's an ambush, let's go," he told him. Clenching his jaw tightly, Miffune followed Tsunade for directions, while Naruto flanked the rear for fending off any enemy attacks. Hopping branch to branch, the blonde cursed Miffune's mobility being restricted only to running and started cleaving down wired traps laid down all around them. He was certainly aware of all the samurais running behind them, following their master like lost puppies. But the main priority right now was Miffune himself. Skipping a step in his hop, Naruto pushed enough chakra to the soles of his so that the bark of the tree cracked, and barreled himself to Tsunade's side, only to watch the scene unfold in vain. He helplessly watched the raging inferno flowing in from ahead of her in horror. He couldn't make it not matter what. Water style. Tearing torrents. Launching a cannon of concentrated water from the river by her side, Tsunade's technique plowed through the flames like butter. She breathed in relief when Naruto landed by her side, a gesture shared by her accomplice. She knew he was the only one right now who could see anything farther than 10 meters away from them in the thick steam settled around the area from those colliding techniques. But that was hardly the case right now. Keep your senses trained, Tsunade. Someone is purposely channeling chakra into the mist. Even my Sharingan cannot fully neutralize everything, so don't drop your guard, he whispered, pushing his back against hers to widen their peripheral vision. He could feel the slight trembling of her body from his back when a wave of potent killing intent washed over the forest. "Tsunade," he called quietly. "Why yes, calm down, Tsuheim. I'll stay by your side." His soothing words doing the trick, he could practically feel her breathing return to normal. Peeling his ears to hear the soft clanging of metal, he knew Miffune and the other samurai were engaging some sort of enemies on their own. But the real enemy was lurching around them being the shinobi among the bunch. Twisting his hand to the back of his neck, he grabbed Kiera by the scuff of her neck and dropped her on the ground. "Go girl," he whispered. The cub soundlessly obeyed his command and dissolved herself in the mist. Now, with another pair of eyes trained on them, Naruto crouched down and placed 2 fingers on the ground. Pulsing a small amount of chakra into the ground, he felt it go no more than 10 meters to his left before it was disrupted. Grabbing Tsunade by her waist, he jumped back and rightfully watched a chained sickle swing in on the spot in annoyance. The enemy was trying to get rid of them quickly, that was for sure. Tsunade, though, had already had enough of this mist. Clapping her palms together, Tsunade churned a humongous amount of chakra in her gut and blasted it out all at once. As a result, the air around them cleared a bit and Naruto's eyes trained in on the silhouette of an averaged height, muscularly built man. Blonde hair, a bit danker than Tsunade's own, the man was wearing a weird hat on his head and the lower half of his face was obscured by a strange helmet-like respirator mask. His headband had 4 vertical lines embossed on it. Whoever the hell it was, he was no ally. No rain shinobi was an ally to the Leaf. Miffune and the rest of their party rallied by the 2 genin, while some more rain ninjas rallied behind the masked men. "It's Hanzo," stammered a shook samurai behind Miffune. "Hanzo?" exclaimed another in shock. "You don't mean of the salamander, do you?" he gasped in terror. Naruto certainly had no idea who the hell this Hanzo was. But whoever the hell it was, this guy was certainly strong. His presence alone was rivaling Sasuke's when the man was serious, and that in itself was a testament to his strength. Rearing ahead in a blur of gold, Naruto expertly circled his knees on the ground and got behind Hanzo's back. The man in question tightened the chain of his Kusarigama to block his kick. Sticking both his palms to the ground, Naruto hopped up to force both his heels on Hanzo's neck and snap his neck like a twig. The man had enough honed instincts to effortlessly jump back and avoid the lethal maneuver while making it look easy. "That's some speed you've got," he complimented the blonde. Naruto took it with a pinch of salt and jumped back by Tsunade's side, who had already had enough by this point. "What the hell do you want?" she snapped. "I have no business with you Leaf ninjas. It's the samurai I want," he told her. "Leave and don't look back. Live to see another day. There are no allies among shinobi." Tsunade hesitated. She knew from the opening attack Naruto had just made that they were no match for him. Even if Naruto could rally toe-to-toe with him, the experience in his eyes alone would crush him. That's not going to happen. Looking at Naruto as if he was stupid, she was about to burst his bubble to turn back and get their sensei until Miffune held them back when we were assigned to escort Miffune to his home, alive. I'm not about to fail that mission. Take my word for it. Naruto pressed on. We should get Hiruzen-sama here, one samurai stammered. Certainly, we are no match for him. Before Miffune could so much as utter a word of defiance and courage to encourage them, his men were running away from him like headless chickens. Naruto couldn't help but send an amused look at the seething man. Those are some warriors you've got, he mocked. It stung. Even Tsunade saw the hurt flash in his eyes. To think his men had scurried away like the cowards they were while the mutinous ninjas were sticking by his side. All for the sake of a mission they could abort any second without any repercussions did shame Miffune to no ends. There were no witnesses among the dead. Even if they left him here to die, they could surely say he fell in battle and go on to take full payment of their mission back home. Why would you stay? He asked, clicking his teeth. Don't count your fortunes yet, old man. The moment I see fit, we are abandoning fort. But until then, I'll fight by your side. Naruto said, his tone cocky. Something in his gut told Miffune the boy wasn't one to abandon an ally. As loose as the term was, given the circumstances, he would take him over death. Ah! Snapping his head back with a start, Miffune watched in horror as the flesh of his comrades was melted off their bones by some weird purple-looking mist. Tsunade grimaced seeing the huge salamander, possibly a summon, swallow the corpses whole before burrowing itself underground. Poison cloud, she told him ruefully. Nodding, Miffune would have teared up in sorrow had he not been experiencing the rage he was feeling right now. Coward or not, they had been his kin. Hanzo Dano, allow me to challenge you to battle. He issued the challenge. Looking amused, so you're Miffune? Eh? Asked Hanzo. Why do you ally with shinobi? Taken aback by his question, Miffune could do nothing more than look at him with a numb gaze, pressing on even harder. It's out of character for all the time you samurai have spent holding on to your stupid old ways. Why contract villages with arms when you resent violence so much? Hanzo asked again. The oh-so-honorable and masterless samurai have finally sold their souls, their loyalties, and joined with shinobi for some throwaway nickels and dimes. Huh? He mocked him. Yet, you still dare to call yourselves samurai? Taking a step back in hesitance from Hanzo's furious roar, Miffune's eyes traveled down in shame in a rare moment of weakness. That was all the time Hanzo needed to prowl on him like the predator he was. But he was certainly not expecting what happened next. Meeting his blade with a clang, experienced black eyes met furious crimson ones for a moment too long before he jumped back to avoid the overreaching slash of Naruto's black blade. Get your heart together, old man. This is no time to fall for such subtle manipulation tactics, reprimanded Naruto. Hanzo was clearly not pleased with the unsolicited interruption. You talk big for a kid your size. Let's see if you can back it up, roared Hanzo, circling the weighted end of his kuzurigama and flinging it at Tsunade's feet to take off her balance. Not being prepared for such a skilled high-speed attack, Tsunade watched in shock as Naruto's form protectively jumped in front of her before he buried the chain into the ground with the tip of his sword, the corner of his eyes warning him of the imminent danger as they saw the slight movement the links to the kuzurigama's chain made. Naruto flicked out a kunai and brought it overhead to block the sickle from embedding its tip right into his skull. For a brat your age, you're not half bad, commented Hanzo. Scoffing, Naruto cleaved his chain in half when the man tried to yank his sword away from him. Preposterous, shouted Hanzo, furious at the state his beloved weapon was in right now. No sword had ever been able to match his in straight combat. To think he had cleaved it without so much as an effort. Hanzo eyed the black blade in Naruto's hands avariciously. What sword is that? He questioned in intrigue. Nothing you need to concern yourself about. Staring down at him in utter disdain. Cheeky little brat. That, muttered Hanzo, both taking a step towards each other. Naruto twisted his blade to allow the light to gleam off his sword. Tsunade, stay back, he whispered and finally caught Hanzo's eyes with the shine his sword was gleaming with. Repulsing in pain, Hanzo blinked off his momentary blindness and instinctively brought his blade up to protect his neck from being slit in two. No matter how dirty you fight. He hissed and kicked Naruto in the chest. Taking the breath away from his lungs, Naruto was launched back like a rag doll before his back harshly met the bark of a tree. The difference in skill is too much, brat. He taunted blithely. Spitting a glob of blood and spit aside, Naruto stood up with furious defiance shining proudly in his eyes. Mirroring Hanzo's slow steps towards him, "We'll just see about that," he said, right before both broke into a sprint towards one another. As soon as he reached within arm's length to him, Hanzo spread his feet apart and circled himself in a fully circular arc, his blade aiming straight for Naruto's torso. Not one for being up so quickly, Naruto hopped on his heels and in a sudden twist of events, landed on Hanzo's flat blade like a monkey, going forth to swing his sword once more for his target's neck. Naruto's eyes barely caught the weighted chain of Hanzo's Kusarigama in his peripheral vision before it wrapped itself around his arms. Swirling him around in circles, Hanzo flung Naruto right back where he came from with the same outcome, just a tad bit harsher, as the last time. Coughing blood this time, Naruto instinctively rolled aside to avoid Hanzo's kick to his chest, a kick that made a small crater on contact. He certainly didn't want to be struck by one of those. Flinging his body up from the waist down, he placed his palms on the ground over his head and started acrobatically back flipping for dear life to avoid Hanzo's relentless slashes. Getting a hold of his feet for a split second, he ran up a tree with the agility of a squirrel, with the enemy in tow, and started hopping away from him, branch to branch, with the agility akin to that of a cat, skillfully dodging all the shurikens being flung at his back. He ran for dear life while Hanzo's ominous shadow started looming over him like a reaper. Twisting his body in mid-air, he blocked Hanzo's blade with his own when his eyes caught Hanzo's subtle smirk. "You're done, brat." Pushing all his weight and brute strength onto him, Naruto barely had time to crane his neck back when the ground beneath them cracked open. A wide-mouthed salamander had its mouth open with bubbling purple poison gurgling in its mouth, the creature waiting to gobble him up like candy any moment now. Breaking free his blade, Hanzo forced both his soles onto Naruto's feet and jumped back with all his strength, effectively sending Naruto tumbling right into the salamander's mouth. That is, he would have had it not been for the white blur that caught him midair and ran off into the distance. "You can run, brat, but you can't hide." With that furious roar, Hanzo jumped onto his summon and followed the trail of that weird white streak, the same size as that brat that was running with that brat he had a bone to pick with. Miffune and that girl could wait and play with his minions for now. He would have them later, for he was feeling a strange new sensation slithering away in his heart, a sensation he hadn't felt in a long time now. This weird Uchiha was stroking his blood lust in all the wrong ways. Pain. That was the first thing Naruto's mind registered as his eyes blinked open in a blurry haze. Blue eyes flickering back and forth to their crimson counterparts could only do so much as to comprehend the shadow of an arm hovering over his head. His mind told him to stand down, every fiber of his being screaming not to move, but his pride whispered otherwise. Raising his arm to stop his enemy's sword, and cursing his own weakness for not being able to stop his arms from shaking, Naruto spat a glob of blood and spit aside. "You're done, Uchiha. I've won at last. Resistance is futile and you will submit," Hanzo stated thick and firm, his voice commanding authority. "Damn it," Naruto cursed for what seemed like the millionth time today. "Why did you stop?" the blonde hissed. His Sharingan finally gave way to naturally aspirated azure eyes. Hanzo's blade hovered over his forehead like an ominous shadow, just an inch here or an inch there, and Naruto's life would be done for. "All I want to hear from your mouth is that you give up," Hanzo said after a moment of silence. Naruto couldn't help but wince out a laugh. "What? Seriously?" He clutched his bleeding innards to give himself some more time in this world. Hanzo smirked himself, moving on to sheathing his blade behind his back. If Naruto hadn't fought him, he'd have labeled him an overconfident jerk. But alas, given the position he was in right now, his words lacked the weight. "This whole battle, all you've done is taunt me, smirk to my face, and if that wasn't enough, you even disrespected my strength. You've tried some underhanded tactics, sure, but not once have you aimed your attacks at my back. Why is that?" Hanzo's words made absolutely no sense to the blonde. Here he was, ready to be killed and put 6 feet under, and yet his opponent was taking his time. This bastard was enjoying this. Wasn't he? Pathetic. The same goes for you. My back was open to you plenty of times as well. And there it was, the thing that both annoyed and elated Hanzo at the same damn time. That godforsaken, prideful smirk of his. Admit it. Admit your defeat, Hanzo said with a bit more force than was necessary to get his point across in that thick skull of his. Naruto shook his head, having no idea just what more this man wanted from him. Well, I do. I give up. I've given everything I've got, and there's still no way I can beat you. The gap between our strengths is too large right now. You're strong. As loath as I am to admit it, Hanzo clasped his mask back onto his mouth to hide his smile. It's good to see you finally realize the full terror of Hanzo the Salamander. You knew from the very start that you were no match for me. Even your comrades ran away with their tails between their legs. Then you not stay back and chance an escape when you know the inevitable? Hanzo questioned in honest curiosity. I can't just turn my back to an opponent willing to give me a fight. And when your blade first met mine, I don't know. Blood started pumping into my head, and all I knew was that I couldn't just turn my back on you. It's sort of like an instinct I have, you know. Plus, Tsunade and the gang trusted me enough to take care of you and watch their back. I've let her down. Again. Instinct, you say? Hanzo rubbed his chin and sat down cross-legged. Intriguing, yeah. I have my moments. Naruto sat a little upright to be eye level with the man. Why don't you finish me off? Or is even finishing me off too belittling for someone of your stature? Naruto knew his bark had no more bite to it. But this was all his ego could take, to be utterly destroyed by an enemy who was toying with him to the very end. Add pitying to that. And well, it wasn't sitting well with his dazed mind and bruised ego right now. It was mostly the latter than the former, though. Quite the contrary, actually. Hanzo dismissed his words with a wave of his hand. I've lived longer than your feeble little mind can even begin to comprehend and fought more battles than the years you've been a ninja. Hanzo scoffed, practically insulted that his legendary status was being looked down upon, by a genin no less. But I know strength when I see it. And yours is formidable, I must admit. To vanquish it right now would be a terrible waste. Wouldn't you agree? Naruto shook his head in disbelief and just let it be. His body and mind were way too tired and beat up to even begin making sense of this situation. Hanzo couldn't help but envy this runt's confidence. Even after being put through the grinder, standing in the face of likely death, Naruto seemed disappointed in being given the chance to live rather than being overjoyed about it. And to think that this brat reminded him so much of himself, sitting defeated in front of that man, all those years ago, was annoying. Speaking of which, there was one other thing he had wanted to ask. Tell me, boy, what is the name Uchiha Madara to you? Hanzo questioned. He had way too much resemblance to Madara for it to be a mere coincidence. Looks-wise, they may be poles apart, but there was something about them in common. Their eyes and the pride that shone within them. The only thing this brat didn't have was Madara's fabled strength. But given a few years, even Hanzo believed this runt could prove to be a worthy adversary. Not on the level as the once revered Uchiha had, however. He could still make a name for himself given some time. There was a moment of silence when all was quiet in the clearing for a few long minutes. Nothing. Never even heard of him. Naruto whispered and his hair shadowed his eyes. Hanzo hummed. That's disappointing. All his younger life, Hanzo had thought himself to be unbeatable, omnipotent even by the time he'd hit his teens. But one day, in scourge of some wandering leaf shinobi who had lost his way in his country and was trying as he might to sneak into the land of earth, Hanzo had ambushed a certain someone in hopes of taking his head and retrieving a fortune for it. It had not ended well for him. At all. Hair dancing in the wind, arms crossed. Go on and cling to your wretched life, worm. Come see me in 100 years when you are worthy to call yourself a man. Until then, survive. Madara had once spoken to a defeated Hanzo. He had been but a bug in his way. A bug who Madara had been more than obliging to squat. That day, in a rare occurrence, Madara had shown mercy to his enemy. Hanzo had made a name for himself by becoming a person who had the balls to fight Madara one-on-one, and survive the next day to tell his tale. A tale Hanzo had been ashamed of even thinking about, much less telling someone. Maybe Madara had pitied him, or Hanzo had been unworthy to die by a legend's hands. it was probably the latter. This Uchiha certainly had that same look in his eyes and the ego to match if nothing else. It was truly a shame that the two weren't related though. Why do you ask? Naruto's question broke Hanzo off of his trance. Hanzo was getting too nostalgic for his own good. Nothing. Just reminiscing about old times. He waved him off. It doesn't concern you, Naruto chuckled. Don't you go dying on me from old age next. Now that would be embarrassing. But the shouts growing louder and louder from afar broke Hanzo off his reverie as he stood up. Turning around to leave, he stopped for a moment and looked back, hesitant if what he was about to do was right or not. But after a minute or so of deep contemplation, Hanzo chucked a vial in the boy's lap and turned to leave. That antidote will only relieve you off the poison. If fate should have it that you do indeed survive those wounds, I'll be looking forward to our next battle in the near future. Though the odds for you are 1 in 10, at best. Well, the odds at least were humbling, Naruto thought in mild bemusement. Naruto laughed again and removed his hand to show Hanzo a gaping hole in his lower left waist. A hole wide enough that it was showing the boulder behind him like clear glass. What makes you think I'll survive this? He asked with a touch of sarcasm, eyes smiling. Mischievous? Chivalry. Twinkle of hope and happiness beyond measure. But he still didn't have an ounce of fear in those eyes of his. Cheeky little brat that. He'd live, probably. I have a gut feeling is all. Hanzo walked away, hand held high in a non-committed wave. But I would watch my back from now on if I were you, he remarked as an afterthought. Bastard. Naruto chuckled when Hanzo was out of hearing range and popped the vial open. Gulping down its contents in one go, the antidote spread through his bloodstream like liquid fire. The pain became so intense that he had to let the pressure off of his wound. But even then, Naruto willed himself not to scream. If he did, Tsunade would lose her wits and her focus if she had him, and probably do something stupid to rush back to his aid. That was simply unacceptable. Now that gave Naruto a different perspective to contemplate. What did Hanzo mean by that? Were his friends in trouble too? What if Tsunade needed him right now? Was that what Hanzo meant by that? What if she was hoping for him to return to her aid and was in trouble? That would not bode well for her or for him at all. He had to get his body moving, and get it moving now. But I've got to do something about this wound first, he muttered in annoyance. His hands idly searched around for a kunai in his holster, and upon finding one, Naruto stuck it in between his teeth and clasped the bloodied hole in his abdomen tightly closed with his fist. Naruto threw his head back in anguish and pushed his hand inward and inward while his chakra transformed into flames, burning his innards to a crisp. His legs swatted back and forth in agony, and he slammed his head on the boulder as he willed himself to change his seal into a horse sign with his free hand. This was truly the one moment he regretted not having any medical expertise. But desperate times called for desperate measures. It was either dying like that or die like a dog, and he'd rather die trying than dying a useless death. If his life could save another, a life as precious as hers, F-fire style. Naruto hesitated. Even through all the torture training Tobarama had put him through, Naruto couldn't help but let fear overtake him for but a moment. A couple of tears rolled down his eyes in sheer terror. His mind couldn't even begin to comprehend the kind of pain that would ensue after this. But the thought of those smiling hazel eyes, that charmingly stupid smile and Tsunade's loud laughs made his resolve steel once more. Shaking hand morphed itself into a composed tiger seal, and Naruto breathed a narrow stream of flames to sear his wounds close and to keep that vision of a smiling paradise still a reality. Ah! It was even more painful than he'd ever imagined. His entire body shook, eyes widened like there was no tomorrow, heart convulsed. Lungs ached for air and his face writhed in agony as the foul smell of smoldering flesh struck Naruto's nostrils. It took all his willpower just to stay awake and not pass out then and there. But he couldn't pass out like this, not when Tsunade could have need of his help. This was a bad idea. Naruto knew it from the moment he started walking. Or stumbling was more like it. His arms felt like stumps made of lead by this point. His legs probably weighed a ton and had a few cracks in them here and there. He could practically feel the cracks, so take his word for it. The cracks were indeed present and accounted for. And Hanzo's antidote felt more like poison right now. Even if it was one, Naruto wasn't particularly sure of his chances for survival. He was limping with a makeshift crutch carved out of a wooden stick for support. What help could he possibly give her given his condition? None. The most he could come up with was to hide from Tsunade's sight until necessity for him arose and jump in front of a lethal blow for her should the need arise for such drastic measures. Not a glamorous plan. Sure, but it was all Naruto could come up with given his flaccid state. In the end, even Naruto knew in his heart that it was all just an excuse to see Tsunade one more time should his body and soul finally give out on him. A fucking shield. That was all he was worth right now. But it was fine if it helped Tsunade, he comforted himself. So this was what death felt like, huh? Naruto marveled. Ego bruised, pride crushed, body probably broken beyond repair, and yet his thoughts felt sharp. His heart felt so clear. It was pure serenity and tranquility bound to emotion in human form. Another cough rocked his body, and Naruto took his time to empty his guts on a tree. Blood and some other stuff he couldn't make sense of spilled on Mother Earth. Eventually, Naruto started walking again. Tsunade would have killed him had she seen him do that. That girl loved nature for reasons beyond his feeble psyche. Tsunade, Naruto whispered, lightheaded. Knees finally gave way to ground as all strength left his body. Naruto, said Blonde, thought he was hearing things in death, but thankfully it was her voice. And Naruto soon realized that he wasn't death dreaming, when instead of crashing face first into the ground, a soft and strong pillar of support held him up firmly. Naruto didn't know what it was, the softness, the scent, or perhaps the distinct feel of her chakra that gave her presence away. But given how blurry his vision was, those were the only things he could rely on to recognize her. Stay still, a soft voice murmured in his ear, and he felt a small surge of chakra moved his arms up. Slowly, like a sculptor who appraised his murals, Naruto caressed her waist and his hand gently roamed across her back. She was still as soft and welcoming as she ever was. Now this was a proper way to go out, Naruto thought with a smile. I'm so glad you're okay. I had no idea what kind of sick freaks were tagging along that man, he whispered. Transferring his crutch onto the other hand, Naruto held out his arm to Tsunade as a gesture, and she wordlessly stepped into his embrace without hesitation, never once removing her hand from his gaping wound. It was a bit wobbly, sure, but it was no less heartfelt than it ever was. Naruto buried his face in her hair and breathed in the earthy, ashen scent of her hair that told him she had been in this battlefield for way too long. Baka, Tsunade sniffed. Worry about yourself this once. I'm okay. Naruto lied weakly, his vision darkening. I just have to shut my eyes for a bit. Oi! Tsunade shook him gently. Don't sleep. Stay awake. You must stay awake. But her attempts at keeping him awake were futile. Even her medical chakra was failed. Naruto's pain-filled consciousness gave way to blissful unconsciousness. Orochimaru, meanwhile, stood behind the two to keep them guard and kept observing their exchange without even a word. Neither was it his place to speak, nor was he interested in them. His mind was too intrigued by the sudden spurge of growth in plants around him. He made sure to take some samples too. Now that was intriguing. Tsunade, Jiraiya clasped her shoulder tightly. We should go and find Sensei now. This place is compromised. Yeah. Tsunade wiped her wet cheeks and nodded, hoisting Naruto upon her shoulders. Let's go, Orochi, said Boy, stopped collecting his plant samples and pocketed them, nodding. Let leave. All of them took to the trees to find Hiruzen and get back to the leaf as soon as possible. Konoha no Sato, Senju households. Uzumaki Mito, contrary to popular beliefs that ran around the village, was in fact a perfectly fine and emotionally sound woman. She wasn't interested in most of Leaf's affairs or its people by virtue of her personality, but she did in fact care an awful lot about the people close to her, which were so few she could probably count them at the tips of her fingers and have some left to continue on sewing her blanket like she was now. With that in mind, has something been bothering you, Tsunade? She couldn't help herself from asking. No, was her granddaughter's curt and precise reply. As it had been for the past few days, she had scooped herself up in the house. Mito smiled. Why are you sulking then? She asked, amused at how transparent her baby girl still was to her. Tsunade, having her back turned to Mito, pulled her knees to her chest and huffed. which Mito knew was her last line of defense before the girl melted in front of her eyes like warm butter after her subtle manipulations. "I'm not sulking." Tsunade pouted. Mito hummed, unimpressed by her lies. Tsunade twitched. "Really?" she stressed. "I'm not." Mito shook her head. "Sure," she remarked offhandedly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Tsunade snapped, annoyed by her curt answers. Mito kept on knitting lock after lock on her blanket in ignorance. "Nothing at all." Her granddaughter's eye ticked. "Why can't you just believe me for once, Bachan?" Tsunade protested. "How can you believe your own words when they hold no weight to them, honey?" Mito replied calmly, cool as a cucumber. Try as she might, Tsunade couldn't conjure up a retort. It was funny for Mito to see her try though. She looked constipated if Mito hadn't known her so well. "NGH," Tsunade whined childishly and forced her face to hide into her lap. That was all Tsunade could do to save the little self-dignity she had left in a spur of the moment. The sight itself was damn near adorable for an oppressive grandmother to witness and not do something about it. "Ah!" Mito cooed softly, placing aside her sewing kit and moving closer to hold her girl from behind. "What's gotten you into such a rut, huh?" Mito smiled even more, seeing Tsunade readily untie her hair so Mito could work her magic into them. Mito wrapped her arms around Tsunade's waist and placed a chaste kiss on top her head. Tsunade nearly melted then and there. "How did you know I was troubled?" Tsunade asked with a tilt of her head, finally tired of arguing with a wall that she knew she couldn't conquer. Mito gave her a knowing smile. "You haven't been coming to me for any medical lessons. No training, no meetings with your friends. Plus, I do cook in this house every day. So, I know when you aren't eating right." Tsunade had the decency to look a tad bit sheepish. "You haven't even gone to visit the hospital even once since Naruto's condition stabilized." The sour look on Tsunade's face hearing that wasn't lost to Mito, but she ignored it. "For now. Why should I care if he's stabilized? He can go and die for all I care." Tsunade snapped. Mito rose an eyebrow. "So, all that crying outside the operation theater during Naruto's surgery, I heard was a lie." She mused. Tsunade blushed. "It wasn't like that. I was just worried was all. I'd do that for anyone," she asserted valiantly. But it was a losing battle, even she herself knew that. Suddenly, the picture behind Tsunade's constipated face from earlier became clear in Mito's eyes. "You two had a fight, I assume?" she idly wondered, easing the kinks in Tsunade's glittering hair. Well-kempt hair were a matter of pride for noble women, after all. "How can we have a fight?" Tsunade thundered, surprising Mito. "Why not?" As far back as Mito could remember, her two blondes bickered on practically everything until they were out of breath. Naruto was usually the one to surrender though. Tsunade had way too much energy to spare at the end of their arguments. "I told you I don't care for him anymore, Bachan." Tsunade tried to switch topics, not like Mito was having any of it. "I saw he had quite a rough time in the last mission." She wondered idly. If possible, Tsunade's mood turned even more sour. "Hell if I knew," she spat bitterly. "He didn't tell you?" Mito asked, surprised. Tsunade was usually the one Naruto confided in almost all of the time. Even Tobarama had admitted her little ones knew each other more than even Mito knew them. That last part irked Mito far more than she bothered admitting. "He doesn't tell me shit." Tsunade nearly bit her tongue at the end. Mito gave her a sharp look. "Language, young lady. I'll not have any of that in this house." "Sorry." Tsunade apologized softly, ducking her head a little. Mito gave her a tight squeeze to re-energize her downtrodden girl. "So that's what this is all about." Tsunade's silent stance gave Mito all the confirmation she needed. There was a moment of silence. "I tried asking him like usual, you know?" Tsunade whispered, and Mito stayed silent so Tsunade could confide all her worries with her. "But he just kept dodging my questions one way or another," Tsunade mumbled, letting her head be pulled onto her grandmother's shoulder and closed her eyes. "He never does that," Tsunade babbled on. Mito stroked her hair comfortingly. "Give him some time." She felt her neck get wet and tightly wrapped Tsunade up in her arms and tried to hide her from the world's worries. "He was so cold to me," Tsunade sniffed. "Shoo." Mito tried to hush her up. "I don't think he trusts me anymore, Bachan." Tsunade finally cried. Mito laughed softly. Don't be silly, he doesn't. I know it. After all, I wasn't there to help him when he needed me. The thought that Tsunade would blame herself for Naruto's severe condition had come to Mito's mind, but her little one was taking it a step too far. She herself knew what Naruto was doing was only natural. It was just that Tsunade hadn't exactly had the same kind of experiences Mito had gone through all her life. He was simply uncomfortable letting Tsunade know he had been totaled by a foe. It must have taken a toll on his pride to let her see his condition, much less tell her what events had led him to it. The thought of Tsunade thinking of him as a weak nobody must have him troubled. Men usually have a saying that women are fickle. It's not exactly true, Tsunade. Mito's voice took a wizened warmth. Men are usually far more vulnerable than us. They just hide it better. Tsunade looked at her grandmother with wide, moist eyes and kept her silence. She loved these moments when her grandmother would share stories upon stories of her younger days. Mito's eyes clouded in fond nostalgia. Your grandfather, for example, he was a silly little man in this house while I always played the responsible role. Tsunade smiled tearfully seeing her grandma looking so happy. It was all a facade though, Mito admitted softly. A facade? Tsunade parroted. Yes, a lie. Mito nodded. He liked leaving all his worries the moment he stepped in the door to this house. It was only so we never got to realize all that he had to go through in his daily life. He honestly thought he had me in oblivion. That fool. Mito's smile countered her words. Seeing Tsunade's eyes mirroring her disbelief, Mito smiled knowing her thoughts. You thought he never had rough days? It wasn't even her fault, to be honest. Hashirama had always been the happy-go-lucky man all his life. It was only in her arms that he showed his true, venerable self. After all, something troubling the god of shinobi was a laughable thought in and of itself. He did have rough days, Tsunade, rougher than most, in fact. Being Hokage is no easy task. And being his first lady is even tougher still. Tsunade had no words to make of Mito's admissions. Every now and then, your grandfather would have something he wanted to talk to someone about but couldn't. Be it his ego, shame, pride, or whatever you want to call it. There were things he wouldn't ever want to confide to anyone about, not even Tobarama. Mito rambled on. But a human can only bubble up so much, and when the time came for him to pop, he did it in the arms of the only person he ever truly trusted in his entire life. You! Tsunade whispered in amazement. Mito smiled, and didn't deny it. Her cheeks took a crimson hue though. He would go on and on like an idiot after a night together and parrot it all out in front of me. You should have seen him afterwards though. He looked so embarrassed and sheepish after it that it was hysterical. She laughed shamelessly at her husband's former misfortunes. What did you do after that? Tsunade asked, way too invested in the story right now. Nothing, Mito said, cleaning an unshed tear from the corner of her eyes. Tsunade shot her a dirty look. Nothing, she parroted. Had it been her in place of her grandmother, there would be hell to pay for whoever would have made Naruto unhappy, unbeknownst to herself at what she was admitting to herself with her psychological comparisons. I just listened. Mito flicked her nose to garner Tsunade's attention. There are times when that is all a man needs. Someone to listen to his heart. But those times are really rare and they only ever share those words with a special someone. Give Naruto some time. He'll come to you when the time for him to pop is finally there, and then he'll tell you everything. Mito said confidently. Tsunade fidgeted. He will, she murmured, unsure of her words. He will. Mito picked her chin up and placed a kiss on her forehead. Tsunade threw her arms around Mito's neck. I love you, Bachan. I love you too, Munchkin. Mito laughed, rubbing her arm gently. Her mind drifted elsewhere as a sudden thought struck her mind. Would you mind doing a mission for me, Tsunade? She wondered out loud. Of course. Tsunade replied instantly, still content in snuggling her face in Mito's neck. Mito knew these were the best times to get Tsunade to do something for her. As guilty as that made her, it was essential. Tobarama would throw a fit when he learned what she had made them do, however. You'd have to take Naruto with you for it, though, Mito stated the condition. Tsunade hesitated, but the petting Mito gave her hair caved her in. Whatever, she mumbled childishly. Mito nodded approvingly. I'll have it approved by your granduncle then, she said. Where do we have to go for it? Tsunade questioned glibly. Yuzu. Mito replied simply. Tsunade nearly gave a squeal in delight. I'll get to see a Shinigiji then. Yes, that you will. Mito laughed in her hand. The last time she had visited Yuzu, Hashirama and her father Ashina had nearly bankrupted their fortunes for Tsunade's gambling endeavors. Seeing Tsunade smiling, gambling is prohibited though. Mito bashed Tsunade's hopes quickly before they got anywhere. Ah! Tsunade pouted. Mito sighed. There was no need for another moment of bankruptcy in her house. Konoha Hospital. Waking up in a hospital was getting annoying pretty fast if someone asked Naruto. But cuffed down to his bed limb for limb, well, this was testing his patience far more than he'd like it being tested. It was the handiwork of Mito Bachan, no doubt about it. Anyone other than her wouldn't have been able to restrain him bar Tobarama, and he would at least have been able to dislocate a couple of joints using chakra to break free. But these dang things had suppression seals slapped over them like there was no tomorrow. Idly, his mind wandered back to the fight and he wondered just how long he had been out for this time. So, a foreign yet known voice interrupted, breaking the silence in the room. Naruto didn't even have to turn his neck to know who it was. Old man, you got decimated the last I heard, Tobarama said, amused. Naruto shot him a dirty look and yanked the chains on his wrists. Do you mind? He motioned to the keys hanging on the back of the main of the door. Not at all. I find it amusing, if anything. Tobarama smirked at his agitated student. Naruto waited and waited and waited some more for him to do something about his cuffs, but Tobarama didn't. Apparently much more content in letting him suffer for some good old amusement. His old man had a very sadistic sense of humor too, if Naruto were to say. Naruto twitched. Very funny, he said dryly, ignoring Naruto's glare. It is from my side, Tobarama remarked instantly. Naruto shook his head, sighing. How long have I been out this time? He asked. You've been kept in an induced cum for a week, Tobarama replied. So, counting the first 2 times, it came down to a round total of a month. Great! Naruto heaved tiredly, rubbing his forehead. His wounds must have been rather severe if Mito Bachan had to go and sign on these drastic measures to keep him down. You nearly died, Tobarama said after a moment of silence. Feeling guilty and ashamed. Yeah, I'm sorry. Naruto apologized. Tobarama uncrossed his arms and got up from the windowsill, walking up to Naruto's bed. He raised his arm as soon as he reached it and Naruto pulled away his face with clenched eyes, fully expecting a slap for his weakness and failure on a crucial mission. When suddenly, out of nowhere, the arm wrapped around his shoulders and forcefully pulled his head into a firm chest. I'm glad you came back alive, Tobarama admitted in no more than a whisper. But his words were no less heartfelt than Mito's would have been in that moment. Naruto's eyes widened and watered, and it hurt his heart far more than it would have had it been a slap in place of this. And so, he buried his face in Tobarama's chest with a soft wail of anguish. Tobarama, having no prior experience in comforting someone, gave his back some pats. There, he muttered lamely. It still irked the current Hokage that his pupil had been expecting a slap for a failure on a mission way above his pay grade. But the kinds of things he had put him through in Naruto's younger years as part of his training, Tobarama honestly wasn't surprised by Naruto's reaction. He had been inwardly furious hearing Naruto's condition, but Hiruzen's report stated that the spot where Naruto had battled his enemy had been a bridge when it had started, but had been dissolved into a scorching crater by the time Hiruzen had laid witness to it. His apprentice had fought valorously and came out alive. That was all a teacher could ask of his student, if Tobarama were to be honest. Mito was correct in constantly nagging him with the fact that these children were still 13 and way too green for the harsh reality lurking outside the Leaf's walls. Oftentimes he had overlooked Naruto's age during his training, going so far as to put him through things that would have made Hiruzen, or even Danzo, quit being his students. But the boy had an ego the size of his grandfather's statue, and so, he had never once complained. Thus, Tobarama had pushed Naruto's limits even farther. He clutched Naruto's shoulder tightly, veins bulging on his wrists. Who was it that did this to you? Tobarama asked. Tobarama's voice held no emotion, and yet Naruto had never heard him sound as menacing and frightening as this. And Naruto didn't have to think twice to realize who Tobarama was referring to. Some man named Hanzo said he was from the Rain Village. He said with a smile, even if Tobarama didn't show it most of the time, Naruto knew he cared. That was enough. Tobarama's jaw clicked in annoyance. He had indeed heard that name. Some idiot trying to bring revolution to the world was what he'd heard of him. He said he knew my grandfather. Naruto added. Tobarama sighed, having already feared this. A mistake is more like it. Your grandfather left him alive during my brother's reign, saying this Hanzo fellow was far too weak to stain his hands with. Hashirama never paid second mind to him either, but those two were on a different level altogether, so their strength measurement skills left much to be desired. He miffed. If possible, Naruto felt even worse hearing this. Someone that man had crushed like a bug had returned the favor to him in full fervor while he had been unable to do anything about it. It was humiliating, pathetic. Moving on to more pressing matters. I'm dissolving Squad 7. Effective immediately. Tobarama revealed with the subtlety of a hammer. Even if the council hadn't been biting down on his back, he would have done it regardless lest he have his pupil going rogue. That was an outcome Tobarama was unwilling to let happen. Ever. So, Naruto hiccuped. I'm no longer. Tendrils of water rose from the flower vase by his bedside, cutting off the shackles as if they were made of styrofoam. Naruto rubbed his aching wrists, not even having the courage to look in his master's eyes. Tobarama eyed him curiously, waiting for a reaction. You are no longer a genin. He confirmed Naruto's fears with a nod. Naruto chuckled. Can't say I didn't expect this. One strike and I'm out. A lone tear gave his feelings away though. Tobarama threw him his headband. I have something different in mind for you, he smirked. Naruto gave him an odd look. Something different, he parroted, weirded out by his vague replies. As if on cue, the door to his room opened and in walked a man Naruto had never, ever seen before. And Naruto had to admit that the man looked intimidating enough that he would have to rate him at least a chunin, if not more. He had shaggy brown hair, reaching eye level, and wore standard-issued shinobi armor with proper holsters tucked in place. His shoulders were armorless, showing he wasn't a man to shy away from some good old hand-to-hand combat. Naruto had to wonder though, how did a man get a cross-shaped scar blotted on his chin? It was stupid on an entirely new level. This is my subordinate, Tobarama introduced the man. Shimura Danzo. The man greeted with a stretched arm. Naruto clasped his hand in a shake. Uchiha Naruto. He greeted back equally politely. Tobarama took it as his cue to cut in. I'm laying down the foundations to an entirely new military organization that will only be called upon in times of extreme stress. Danzo will be heading this new organization, and the only one his subordinates will answer to is me. I'll have direct authority to its soldiers, no one else. Naruto caught his gist. No council? He asked slickly. Tobarama smirked. Just me, he said with a nod. Danzo looked at Tobarama and the man nodded back to his student. Raise your sleeve, Tobarama commanded Naruto. Danzo's hands went through a few hand seals, and he reached with his glowing right palm to touch Naruto's bicep. He would have, had Naruto not caught his wrist in a tight grip and glared at Danzo with his Sharingan activated. What the hell do you think you're doing? Branding someone with a seal wasn't something Naruto was comfortable accepting from a complete stranger. Danzo narrowed his eyes into slits. Branding you, he replied simply. Tobarama's teeth clicked. It's necessary for all members, just a call sign of sorts when I would require your services. He explained to calm the two glaring parties down. I'm not having myself branded with a seal by some stranger. Naruto threw Danzo's wrist back roughly and pulled back his arm, Sharingan active all the time. Tobarama held his hand up to motion for Danzo to keep his cool here and nodded at Naruto. He couldn't even fault the boy, having known just who it was that had trained him in the art of sealing. Tobarama walked around the bed. I'll do it then, he sighed and went through the same seals. Naruto memorized the seals unknowingly, even though he had practically no use for it, and let Tobarama do it in Danzo's place. Sensei. Danzo spoke for the first time since coming here. He doesn't take orders well. He's a worthy candidate for this organization regardless. I've trained him. Have faith. Tobarama insisted. As you say then, Danzo conceded, not willing to argue with a man he respected so much. What does joining this organization entail anyways? Naruto asked, looking at the weird two-pronged mark on his shoulder curiously. It didn't even hurt, so that was a relief to him given his present condition. You will protect the village from exceptional threats, conduct high-risk missions into enemy territory, and deal with extremely strong ninja. You will also be responsible for carrying out assassinations, tracking, surveillance, and missions requiring specially trained ninja. Some of our members will serve as interrogators that probe the minds of enemy ninja to learn information valuable to the village, and we shall recruit our own medics as well. And since we will become so vital to the village's operations, we cannot be arrested by regular police forces without a warrant. While many will choose to serve in this organization for furthering their careers, they can return to the standard forces if they choose to, should the pressure become too much for them, that is. Danzo replied instead, quick on his feet to make a jab at Naruto with his last words. Naruto blinked. It seems like the old man here is the dictator over there. Danzo couldn't believe Tobarama let him away with such blatant disrespect in front of everyone. Lord Second. He corrected, earning a glare from Naruto. He was already beginning to dislike this man, and it wasn't even his first day in this organization yet. Tobarama threw Naruto a scroll containing his equipment and motioned for him to unseal it. You'll be joining it after returning from the last mission Mito assigned you as a genin. Tobarama told him, his voice laced in authority. Naruto unsealed the scroll, caressing the leopard-shaped mask on his lap gently. What's it called? He questioned, holding up the well-made gray Kevlar jacket to inspect it closely. Tobarama couldn't help but puff his chest out in pride. The ANBU Black Ops.